Imagine playing a video game that suddenly turns into an entirely different game halfway through. One moment you're comfortable with the gameplay and tone, and the next moment everything is upside down. The genre, the mood, even the rules might change. Some games pull off this kind of wild mid-playthrough transformation, flipping the script on players in spectacular fashion. So let's look at some video games that drastically changed gameplay, tone, and genre mid-playthrough. From cheerful dating sims that descend into horror to action games that unexpectedly sprout real-time strategy mechanics, these titles keep players on their toes. But before we get into it, a friendly spoiler warning. I'm going to discuss these games and it means revealing their big mid-game twists. So if you haven't experienced them, consider this your heads up that surprises lie ahead. And for everyone that has seen these, let's look into these genre-bending adventures with open mind and a sense of humor, because things are about to get weirdly interesting. Nier Automata begins as a stylish action RPG about combat androids in a war against machines. At first, it feels like a high-octane hack-and-slash adventure. You control the android 2B through post-apocalyptic landscapes, slashing through robot enemies with fluid Platinum Games-style combat. The tone is serious but familiar for a sci-fi action game. You have quests, cool combo moves, boss fights with epic music. It's kind of the game where you might think you know what you're in for. A well-made action romp with maybe a few twists in the story. And for a while, that's exactly what it is. Then you finish the game, and Nier Automata asks you to play it again. This is where things start to change dramatically. After ending Route A, instead of being truly done, the game continues with a second playthrough from a different character's perspective. Now you control 9S, and the gameplay shifts. The camera perspective and style sometimes change too, shifting to top-down or side-scrolling views during certain sequences. What began as a straightforward third-person action game now throws in segments of other genres. You can be doing melee combat, next thing you're doing a shoot-'em-up, and then at one point you're doing a text adventure segment. It's as if the developers got bored sticking to one genre and said, let's just add everything. The story, too, unveils new layers. Second playthrough reveals hidden truths about the enemy machines, completely recontextualizing the plot. But it's not done there. After those two playthroughs, an entirely new third act opens. The gameplay and story escalate further. You alternate between characters, face new enemy types, and witness the narrative take a philosophical turn about consciousness and purpose. By the final stretch, Nier Automata has shed its initial skin entirely. What began as a simple mission to win a war becomes an introspective, metatextual experience. In the final ending, the game breaks the fourth wall by turning the end credits into a literal bullet hell shooter where you, the player, must shoot enemy names while uplifting music plays. It even asks a profound question, whether you'll make a sacrifice to help strangers. It's both emotional and utterly unconventional. The result of all this mid-game shifting is that Nier Automata constantly surprises the player. One moment you think you're playing a conventional action RPG, the next moment you're not sure what you're playing anymore. The game blends hack and slash, shoot 'em up, text adventure, all these different elements into one package, using each genre twist to reinforce its story's themes. It can be a bit mind-bending. Some players finish Route A and scratch their heads, like, what is that? Only to realize the adventure was barely half complete. But this ambitious genre hopping is exactly why the game is so celebrated. It takes the phrase "played again" to a whole new level. It gives you a fresh gameplay experience with each new chapter. Informative, thought-provoking, and occasionally humorously bizarre, Nier Automata keeps redefining itself mid-playthrough. It's like getting multiple games in one, and by the end you've played an action game, a bullet hell shooter, a text novel, and more, all wrapped in one wild, genre-defying ride.
Okay, time to figure out what's on this thing.
At first, Inscryption masquerades as a creepy, clever card game with escape room elements. You start the game trapped in a dark cabin, facing a mysterious, shadowy figure across a table who wants to play a card game with you. The vibe is roguelike deck builder meets horror. The gameplay initially is all about the card battles. You draw creature cards like squirrels and wolves, and sacrifice weaker cards to play stronger ones, trying to beat the game master. But everything revolves around that sinister card game. It's tense and atmospheric. You might think the whole game will be these spooky cards and puzzles experience, sort of like a haunted Slay the Spire. And for a while it is. Cards talk to you, the opponent wears creepy masks to roleplay boss fights, and you get pulled into the unsettling atmosphere. Then, if you manage to win, a big twist happens. Inscryption doesn't end or simply restart, it transforms. Suddenly you're shown footage of a retro 8-bit style video game. The game essentially reboots into an entirely new format. Act 2 of Inscryption throws you into a bright pixel art world reminiscent of a classic Game Boy RPG. The 3D realistic cabinet and cards are gone, replaced with a top-down Pokemon-inspired overworld. The same characters now appear as 8-bit sprites playing different roles, and the game rules have expanded. Now you have 4 different decks based on 4 scribes, each with their own mechanics. It feels like you've stepped into a sequel of the game, or as if Inscryption changed genres to mimic an old card battler. The tone is also lighter and more adventurous, at least on the surface. It's a dramatic shift. Many players at this point are probably like, wait, what just happened to the game I was playing? Creepy horror atmosphere gives way to something that looks almost cute, yet there's an underlying weirdness that keeps you uneasy. Just when you adapt to this retro adventure, Inscryption pulls the rug out again. Without spoiling every detail, let's just say that Act 3 changes the game once again. The setting jumps to a futuristic computerized world dominated by the robotic scribe. Now the graphics are sort of 3D Tron-like, and the card game has a tech theme. It's as if you booted up yet another completely different game, within the same game. By this point, Inscryption has gone from a hard deck builder to an 8-bit RPG to a sci-fi strategy game, and if that's not enough, it layers a meta story on top involving found footage, live-action videos of a vlogger uncovering the secrets of a mysterious floppy disk. Yes, it's extremely meta. You, the player, are essentially playing a cursed game within a game, and the narrative bounces between those layers. What makes Inscryption's mid-game shifts so memorable is how completely it blindsides you. It's not advertised as a game that will change genres. You go in expecting a single type of experience and end up getting 3 or 4 in one. The rules of the game evolve with each act, forcing the player to learn new strategies on the fly. This could have been a hot mess, but Inscryption ties it all together with a mysterious storyline that slowly reveals while all this is happening. Keeps you hooked, thinking, alright, what else can this game possibly become? A sense of dark humor underpins it too. Inscryption knows it's messing with you. Inscryption demonstrates a bold approach to game design, blending multiple genres to serve a narrative. Starts as one thing and morphs into something very different. Some might believe that they essentially got 3 games for the price of one, while others might be thrown off with the deck-building roguelike they signed up for turns into a retro adventure. But there's no denying the ambition. By the end, you'll have experienced card game battles, puzzle solving, exploration, and even a bit of full-motion video storytelling. It's a dramatic, mid-playthrough shift done right, keeping us bewildered, entertained, and slightly spooked at every turn. If you ever wanted a game that refuses to stay in one genre box, Inscryption is the poster child. Just be prepared to explain to your friends that it starts off as this, but then it becomes that, and then it really becomes that, which is half the fun of recommending the game. At the outset, Doki Doki Literature Club is all sunshine and smiles. It presents itself as a typical lighthearted dating sim set in a high school. The premise is classic. You're a student who reluctantly joins the school's literature club, which happens to be filled with 4 cute anime girls, and they each embody certain tropes. The cheerful childhood friend, the shy bookworm, the feisty baker, and the perfect club president. The art is bright and adorable, all pink hearts and cupcakes. You spend your early playtime writing cutesy poems, choosing which girl to share them with, and reading lots of flirty, innocent dialogue. Everything from the music to the interface screams harmless romantic comedy. In fact, if you didn't know any better, you'd think this game was just a by-the-numbers visual novel about making one of the girls your girlfriend. It initially appears to be exactly that. Then, in a move that has become infamous, Doki Doki Literature Club flips the genre on its head. After an hour or two of building up relationships and sugary atmosphere, the tone makes a hard swerve into darkness. One of the girls, Sayori, your cheerful best friend character, is revealed to be suffering from severe depression. This is foreshadowed a bit, but the game still feels generally upbeat, till it's suddenly not. In a shocking scene, Sayori's mental health spirals and she dies by suicide, completely catching the player off guard. The game doesn't politely handle this off-screen either. It confronts you with the disturbing visual and the abrupt end of that happy music. Feels like the floor just drops out from under you. But here's where things get really wild. The game glitches out as if something has broken. Moments later, it restarts on its own. That cheerful title screen you remember? It's subtly wrong. Sayori, the girl who died, is missing from the title image, as if she never existed. Your save file is gone. The game continues, but now strange, unsettling things happen in what used to be a normal story. From this midpoint onward, Doki Doki Literature Club reveals its true colors as a metafictional psychological horror game. The narrative effectively reboots without Sayori, and as you play through what seems like a second run, the remaining characters start behaving oddly. Text might garble or display unsettling messages. The artwork occasionally warps into creepy distortions. Characters' eyes might disappear for a split second, or the game might abruptly flash a terrifying photo before resuming the cute art style. The writing gets increasingly unsettling and self-aware. For example, another club member, Yuri, who is a shy, harmless girl in the first act, becomes unnervingly obsessive and unstable in the second act, culminating in a gruesome scene that literally traps you in it. The tone is now intentionally disturbing. This is no dating sim, it's a horror game wearing a cute mask. As the game continues to unravel, it becomes clear that Monika, the club president, has become self-aware. She knows she's in a game, and she's been manipulating events to have you, the player, all to herself. This leads to the final act where Monika deletes the other characters entirely, and you end up in a surreal one-on-one conversation with her in a blank void of a classroom. The only way to break out of this nightmare is to do something completely outside the normal gameplay. You have to go into the game's files on your computer and manually delete Monika's character file. Talk about breaking the fourth wall. Doki Doki Literature Club breaks it, shatters it, and dances on the rubble. What started as a parody of a dating sim ends as a full-blown meta-horror experience, with a game directly addressing the player and messing with your expectations. The transformation of Doki Doki Literature Club mid-playthrough is a dramatic change in both genre and tone. It's not a gradual tonal shift, it's a trapdoor that plunges you from light into darkness. One minute you're serenaded by chirpy anime theme songs, later you're hearing unsettling static and distorted screams. The innocent romance dialogue gives way to discussions of mental illness, violence, and existential crisis. Many players have reported being genuinely shocked or even deeply unnerved, especially if they went in unaware of the twist. The game itself actually had to come with content warnings because of how drastically it subverts its cute facade. Yet the brilliance of this shift is how effective it is. By luring players in with a false sense of security, all the tropes of a fluffy dating sim, the shock of the horror elements is amplified tenfold. People would tell their friends, "You have to try this game, but I can't tell you why," knowing full well the unsuspecting players would be in for a mind-blowing surprise. In terms of game design, it's a masterclass in subverting player expectations. In terms of humor and tone, the game itself maintains a sly, dark humor, even as it goes to a very dark place. For the player, the experience ranges from giggly enjoyment to jaw-dropping horror. It's both light and deadly serious, split neatly by that mid-game turning point. By the end, you're left a bit stunned, perhaps even a little heartbroken. Doki Doki Literature Club proves that even the most saccharine setups can hide a dagger behind their back. It invites you in with promises of a fun, harmless time, and then scares the living crap out of you. In hindsight, the game's title itself is a playful misdirection. Doki Doki is a Japanese onomatopoeia for a heartbeat. By the end, it might as well describe your pounding heart from sheer fright.
Okay. You sure you're ready for this? Because what I hold in my hand is not just gonna blow your mind. It's gonna blow your soul. If you dare.
Brutal Legend lured players in with its very specific promise, a heavy metal action adventure starring Jack Black with lots of rocking out and butt kicking. The game's first few hours deliver exactly that. You play as Eddie Riggs, a roadie who gets transported to a fantasy world inspired by heavy metal album art. It's a bizarre and awesome setting. Mountains made of amplifiers, seas of chrome, and every heavy metal cliche brought to life. The gameplay early on is what you'd expect from an action title. He wields an axe and a guitar to fight demons. You drive a hot rod around an open world, completing quests, slaying baddies, and rocking to your soundtrack of Iron Maiden and Motorhead. The tone is over-the-top comedic, as you'd expect from Tim Schafer's Double Fine studio, equal parts badass and goofy. And if you watch the trailers or play the opening, you'd think Brutal Legend is mainly a third-person hack-and-slash adventure with some open-world exploration. And it is. That he starts gathering allies to fight the evil demonic overlord, the gameplay shifts towards real-time strategy elements. It doesn't happen all at once, but by the midpoint you find yourself in full-blown battles that play nothing like the early game. The game introduces stage battles, which are essentially strategic war battles set to music. So here's how it works. You still control Eddie on the ground, so you can still do the hacking and slashing, but you also have a stage that acts as your base. From this stage, you can recruit units, for example headbangers, or base player support units. To recruit units, you have to capture fan geysers by setting up merchandise booths. Yes, the resource in this world is Heavy Metal Fans Energy, which is both hilarious and a pretty clever parody of RTS resource gathering. While managing all this, you can also take to the sky to get an overhead view and direct your troops. Suddenly you're not just mashing attack buttons yourself, you're ordering squads of units to attack, defend, or follow. It's a huge change in gameplay, essentially a new genre emerging inside the game. For players who didn't know this was coming, the first major stage battle can be a what the heck moment. One mission you're doing a story-driven solo boss fight, and the next you're asked to manage an army and protect a stage from waves of enemies. Brutal Legend does try to tutorialize it, but it's still jarring. The entire pacing and tone of gameplay changes. Now you have to think like a strategist, not just a hero. Positioning your headbangers, telling your ranged units when to attack, upgrading your stage for stronger troops. These are classic RTS mechanics, not something typically seen in a console action game. Ultimately, as the campaign continues, nearly every big confrontation is an RTS-style stage battle. By the end game, you're essentially playing a hybrid of a hack and slash and a strategy war game. The fusion is unique. You're in the battle personality and commanding it from above. In theory, it's like being the general and a foot soldier at the same time. The mid-game genre switch in Brutal Legend has a mixed reception among players. Many were drawn in by the action-adventure marketing, felt blindsided when the game became something different. Some loved it, appreciating the matchup of genres and how it fit the theme of leading a rock army. Others felt a bit like they were tricked into playing an RTS, a genre they might not enjoy. It's a fiercely divisive decision choice. Players who were enjoying the simple hack and slash suddenly had to deal with strategy mechanics they probably weren't interested in. On the other hand, a subset of players thought that the second half was where the game truly came alive. It's a classic case of a mid-game shift that splits the audience. From a tonal perspective, Brutal Legend remains consistently metal and tongue-in-cheek throughout. Even the RTS battles are full of loud music and pyrotechnics on your stage. Jack Black's quips as Eddie and the overall humor persist. This was uncommon on consoles, so it stands out as a bold experiment. There's something undeniably epic about the later battles. Imagine commanding an army while shredding a guitar solo that buffs your troops, all while a giant metal monstrosity looms on the battlefield. It captures the feeling of an epic rock concert mixed with warfare. In that sense, the genre shift serves the theme. You start as a lone rocker and end as a full-on band leader conquering the world with music and might. For a player experiencing it, once you adapt, it can be quite thrilling. The first stage battle might feel like an ambush of new mechanics, but by the third or fourth, you're summoning squads and soloing enemies in harmony. Brutal Legend in the end is half an action game and half an RTS, and it's the midpoint of the game where that balance tips from one to the other. Whether that's brilliant or flawed likely depends on your taste, but one thing's for sure, it turned what could have been a one-note action game into something players still talk about years later. It literally changed its genre midstream, daring to mix mosh pits with strategy maps. So if you ever play Brutal Legend, now you know. Prepare not just for guitar solos, but perhaps some tactical thinking as well. It's as if the game itself said, we're not going to stick to the usual verse-chorus structure, time for a prog metal interlude. Love it or hate it, that's a twist you just don't see every day. In 2001, Halo Combat Evolved landed players in an epic sci-fi war. As Master Chief, a super soldier in powered armor, you start the game fighting the Covenant, a collective of alien races, on a mysterious ring world called Halo. The first half of the game is all about that classic Space Marine action. Firefights in wide open valley areas, tactical battles against elites and grunts, and controlling vehicles like the Warthog Jeep. And it's all scored to that heroic orchestral music pumping you up. The tone is very much alien shoot 'em up, with a military sci-fi vibe. Think of movies like Aliens or Starship Troopers. Intense battles, but you feel like the ultimate badass, not a helpless prey. Halo introduces you to this beautiful ring world with bright skies and swaying grass, and even though there's mystery around, your objectives are straightforward military ones. By around mid-game, you're feeling confident. You've taken out plenty of the Covenant, you've survived some tough skirmishes, and you might be thinking the game, while fun, is somewhat predictable in its tone. And then the flood happens. About halfway through the campaign, Halo suddenly shifts from a war story to a horror story. Master Chief stumbles upon the aftermath of some battle where something has gone terribly wrong. In the famous level, you wander through eerie, silent corridors of an underground facility. Covenant you were pursuing are found dead, and you retrieve a helmet recording that shows to your horror squirmy parasite creatures attacking and mutating soldiers into monstrosities. This is the introduction of the Flood, an ancient parasite that turns its hosts into horrifying zombie-like forms. The moment they appear, the entire tone of the game changes, taking its cues from horror games and films that are more bombastic in action. The environment becomes dark and claustrophobic. Your usual battle music is replaced with unsettling silence and distant scuttling noises. Then the Flood burst onto the scene, swarming you in a way the game has never done before. Instead of carefully taking cover and trading shots with intelligent aliens, you're suddenly backpedaling furiously, firing at grotesque mutants that charge straight at you. Even as smaller Flood infection forms jump at your face, it's panic-inducing the first time around. It was incredibly impactful. Halo goes from a balanced FPS where you often have the upper hand, to a quasi-survival horror experience where you feel outnumbered and on the defensive. What was a straightforward fight for victory becomes a fight for survival. The Covenant enemies, those elites and grunts, suddenly take a back seat as they're also getting obliterated by the Flood. Now you have two problems, your old foes and this terrifying new one. The narrative stakes ramp up as well. You learn Halo isn't just a ring world, but a weapon to contain the Flood, and things are spiraling out of control. The tone stays ominous for several levels. Notably, the level called The Library is basically a full-on horror gauntlet. You slog through dark halls with endless Flood ambushes, eerie lighting, and a genuine feeling of dread. What's fascinating is that Halo doesn't change its core gameplay controls. You're still playing a first-person shooter, but the experience feels completely different. Early Halo is about tactical combat and bright outdoor arenas. Mid to late Halo feels more like a survival shooter. Players often recall their first run-in with the Flood as one of the most memorable gaming moments because it was so unexpected. A game that felt like a straightforward action movie suddenly dipped into horror territory. It's the equivalent of a summer blockbuster that halfway through turns into a scene from The Exorcist. And it worked. It made the Halo storyline far more engaging and the world more dangerous and intriguing. This genre and tone shift was scary, but exhilarating. One minute you're the hunter, the next minute you're the hunted. Halo's AI and encounter design even changed to accommodate the horror vibe. The Flood come at you in mindless waves, which is a stark contrast to the tactical duck and cover of the Covenant. So you have to adapt your playstyle on the fly. The shotgun you picked up, it becomes your best friend in tight corridors against Flood combat forms. Your heart rate goes up as your ammo count goes down. You start feeling real concern about what's around the next corner. This was new for Halo players at the time. FPS games had done horror, but Halo tricked you by not starting that way. It earned the shock by first presenting itself as something else for a good chunk of the game. After those initial, purer horror levels, Halo blends the two styles for the rest of the campaign. You'll have battles where Covenant and Flood are fighting each other and you're caught in the middle, a chaotic mix of action and horror elements. The climax and final escape brings back the action movie feel, but you never forget that lurking horror of the Flood still exists. In later sequels, Bungie leaned into making the Flood sequences even more horror-like because they show how effective it was in Combat Evolved. Halo pulled a mid-game tone switch that is now legendary, from sci-fi shooter to spine-chilling survival. It didn't change the game entirely, but it dramatically changed the feel. It's a testament to how changing the tone and enemy design can make a game feel like a different genre without altering the fundamental mechanics. Many Halo players recall nervously roaming those Flood-infested corridors with as much intensity as they remember any grand battle on the beach against the Covenant. Master Chief went from soldier to something like a horror protagonist for a while, and the player's emotions follow suit. This kind of mid-playthrough shift showed that Halo had ambitions beyond cool shooting aliens. It wanted to give you an experience with highs, lows, fear, and adrenaline. And it succeeded, leaving a mark on players' memories. So as we've seen, video games are quite capable of pulling off wild mid-playthrough transformations. Each of these titles starts by establishing one type of experience, only to pivot into something completely different later on. This kind of design is a high-risk, high-reward gamble. On one hand, it can create some of the most memorable and mind-blowing moments in gaming, ensuring players never forget the time that cute dating sim went full horror, or that action game suddenly asked me to command an army. On the other hand, such drastic switches can be jarring or even polarizing. It's unsurprising that these genre flips often prove fiercely divisive. Some players feel like they're having fun and get yanked into a new game. Others absolutely love the surprise, appreciate the fresh gameplay or narrative. What's consistent is that these mid-game shifts get people talking. They turn a game into more than just a single genre experience. They become almost a journey through multiple games in one. Whether it's for humor, horror, or just to subvert expectations, the developers took a leap of faith that shaking up the formula would enhance the overall experience. In many cases, it does. The shock of Doki Doki's horror makes its commentary on visual novels far more impactful. The genre blending in Nier Automata reinforces its themes of perspective and repetition. The Flood's arrival in Halo raised the stakes of the story dramatically, etching a remember when moment in every Halo fan's mind. These examples highlight the creativity and boldness in game design. It's not easy to execute a mid-game genre change. You risk alienating your audience. But when it works, it can elevate a game from good to legendary. These titles also show a range of techniques from pulling off the switch. Some drop subtle hints early to seed the idea that something's not right, while others like Halo keep their cards hidden until the big reveal, maximizing the surprise. Whether these mid-game changes make you laugh, scream, or simply say, hey, that's pretty cool, they succeed in making the player's journeys anything but predictable. It's a reminder that video games, as an interactive medium, have a unique power. They can play with the player. They can leverage your expectations, lull you into a routine, then turn the whole thing upside down, making you as a player feel the same shock or revelation that a character might feel in the story. It's an advanced magic trick in game design, and we're the willing participants. So the next time you start up a game that seems straightforward, keep an open mind. That JRPG might secretly be planning a shoot-'em-up sequence in the middle. That puzzle game might break the fourth wall at the end. And that's the fun of it. As players, we live for those surprises and genre-bending adventures that defy convention. Love them or hate them, games that dramatically change mid-playthrough prove that creativity in this medium is alive and well. And sometimes, the best way to keep players on the edge of their seat is to pull the rug out from under them when they least expect it. After all, why would you settle for a game genre that you could have 2 or 3 of in one? In the world of gaming, the most unforgettable experiences often come from those wild left turns. Don't forget to let me know down below if you remember any of these gaming twists and how did they affect you. Thanks as always for watching these videos, I really appreciate it. If you liked it, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and maybe ring the notification bell if you want more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I love you. Bye-bye. You remember video game stores? Back in the 90s and 2000s, these stores were more than just retail shops. They were hallowed ground for gamers. From the 16-bit glory days of the SNES and Sega Genesis through the dawn of the PlayStation 2 era, walking into a game store was an experience unto itself. It was a time when browsing was an adventure, and every visit held the promise of discovering something new or exciting. So today, let's take a nostalgic journey through those magical game store days, exploring the sights and sounds of the shops, the thrill of the demo kiosks and midnight releases, the joy of trade encounters, and that warm sense of community found in both major chains and mom-and-pop retro stores. So I'm going to take you back for a minute. You push open the door to your local game store and are immediately greeted by that rush of cool air and the distinctive new game smell. It's a mix of fresh plastic, ink from game manuals, and electronics. The walls are plastered with colorful posters of the latest releases. One might be a giant Super Mario 64 mural, another a dramatic Final Fantasy VII standee. Shelves and racks are lined with game boxes, vibrant Super Nintendo and N64 cartridge boxes in the mid-90s, and later the neat rows of PlayStation CD cases and PlayStation 2 DVD cases in the 2000s. Cover art alone could captivate you for minutes on end. Whether it was a bold golden logo of The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or the futuristic sports car on a Gran Turismo cover, every box beckoned with promises of adventure. And as a kid, or teen, or even adult in that era, you could happily lose track of time just browsing. The sounds of the game store were just as enchanting as the visuals. There was usually a game console or two set up in the corner, demo kiosk pumping out catchy theme music or sound effects. You'd hear the tinny demo of Sonic the Hedgehog running on a Sega Genesis, or the roaring engines from a Cruisin' USA arcade cabinet. In the late 90s and 2000s, you might catch the menu music of Halo or the upbeat tunes of Pokemon on a Game Boy demo unit. Kids would gather around these stations, eyes wide and hands glued to the controllers, often swapping turns with friends or friendly strangers. Over by the counter, you'd hear the chatter of employees enthusiastically debating which new RPG or shooter was worth your money this month. Sometimes they'd be on the phone with another customer, holding that last copy of Chrono Trigger or Metal Gear Solid for someone who called in begging them not to sell it before they arrived. It was an audio tapestry of excitement and anticipation. If you were around during those times, I hope this little section brought you back to the great times of video game stores. I think one of the most magical parts of the 90s and early 2000s game store visit was trying out those demo kiosks we were just talking about. Before YouTube trailers and instant downloads, this was often your first chance to actually play the newest games. Stores would have display units, often with a console bolted down and controllers attached by cords. This invited you to give a new game a test run. If you grew up in this time, you probably remember craning your neck up at a TV screen mounted high, hands gripping a controller as you tried a level of the newest hit. Maybe you guided Mario through Bomb Battlefield in Super Mario 64, or tried to land a 900 in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, while some kid waited behind you for his turn. It was interactive advertising at its best. You'd walk in bored on a Saturday, and walk out begging your parents for the game you just sampled. These kiosks were true magnets for young gamers. Often a small crowd would form around them, onlookers giving tips or oohing and aahing at the graphics. In the 90s, seeing a 3D game like Mario 64 or Crash Bandicoot in action for the first time this way was mind-blowing. And even in the 2000s, demos like Halo or Soul Calibur could draw a crowd. The demo station wasn't just about playing, it was a social hub. You'd chat with the person next to you about whether the game was cool or boast that you had read in a magazine about a secret move. Sometimes the stories had multiple kiosks, one for a Nintendo console, one for Sony, maybe a Game Boy or DS you could try out. The controllers were often grimy from hands, and sometimes the staff would remind you to be careful, but it all felt like part of the experience. Trying a game in-store was a tantalizing preview, and if you were lucky enough to have your parents with you, it was also the perfect chance to convince them to buy it for you. Demo kiosks encapsulated the try-before-you-buy excitement that modern gamers raised on digital downloads might not ever fully understand. In the late 90s and 2000s, major chain game stores became staples of malls and shopping centers, and for many of us, they were the go-to spots to feed our gaming passion. Shops like GameStop, EB Games, FuncoLand, or if you're as old as I am, Babbage's, were practically sacred ground. These places had a particular vibe: the carpeted floors and bright fluorescent lighting, the walls lined with games sorted by console, and glass display cases at the counter showing off shiny new hardware or rare used games. Visiting one was often the highlight of a trip to the mall. You'd make a beeline there while your parents were off in other stores, and they knew exactly where they'd find you later, glued to a Game Boy Advance demo unit or chatting with the store clerk about the next Pokemon release. The chain stores were also where we learned the art of pre-order and trade-in. Employees would ask you if you wanted to reserve a copy of an upcoming game. Put $5 down and we'll hold your copy of Final Fantasy X on launch day. Pre-ordering felt like a guarantee that you'd be part of gaming history on day one. Then there were trade-in counters, a defining feature of shops like GameStop and FuncoLand. How many of us remember the ritual of trading in games? You'd gather a stack of your old titles, maybe reluctantly parting with a beloved Street Fighter II cartridge or a beaten-up copy of Gran Turismo 2, and bring them to the counter. The clerk would inspect each disc or cartridge, maybe clucking at any scratches, and then announce how much store credit you'd get. Often it was laughably low, like trading 5 games might barely afford you one new one. But as cash-strapped kids, the store credit was the golden ticket to something new. Taught us the painful lesson of depreciation. Like, what do you mean this Pokemon Blue copy is only $7? But also the joy of walking out with a brand new game partially financed by older adventures. Game stores truly allowed us to buy, sell, and trade our way through our hobby, cycling our collections to experience more. These chains were everywhere, and each had its own quirks. FuncoLand, for example, was known for handing out a printed price list of every game they sold. Pages and pages of titles with their trade-in values. Essentially a giant menu of gaming goodness that you could take home and pore over. EB Games often had a big PC games section, with towering boxes for titles like Doom, Myst, or Warcraft 2 on display. GameStop, which eventually absorbed these older chains, became synonymous with the gaming lifestyle in the 2000s. Many of us have fond memories of chatting up the store employee for tips or hearing their recommendations. They might upsell you on a Game Informer magazine subscription at the register, which, to be fair, often came with a cool discount card, but we hardly minded. Being surrounded by games and gamers was comforting. On the shelves, you'd find strategy guides for sale, big glossy books promising to reveal every secret of games like Ocarina of Time or Grand Theft Auto. I have fond memories of standing in a GameStop and just flipping through strategy guides, knowing full well that I would not be buying them. One of the peak experiences a game store could offer was the midnight release. This was the moment when the hotly anticipated game would go on sale at 12:01 a.m., and fans would line up late into the night for the privilege of being the first to play. I remember sitting outside with my buddy for the midnight release of Wrath of the Lich King, which we went home immediately and stayed up all night playing. These events were part purchase, part party. At big mall stores or GameStop locations, launch night could turn the storefront into a festival. You'd drive by and see a crowd of gamers wrapped around the building. There was a camaraderie in these lines. Strangers became friends as you traded stories to pass the time. When doors finally opened and that shiny new game or console was in hand, the atmosphere was pure celebration. Store staff would often cheer for the first customers walking out with their prize, and everyone in line would holler and clap. Think back to October of 2000, where the release of the PlayStation 2 had people forming giant lines. In later years, midnight launches for games like Halo 2 or Halo 3, Grand Theft Auto, or Call of Duty drew hundreds of fans out into the night. These were events where you might bump into school classmates or work colleagues, all bound by the same giddy excitement. And once the sales began, it was a rush. Cash registers ringing, staff calling out names for pre-orders, people leaving with giant smiles, clutching their new game like it was a precious treasure. For many of us, attending a midnight release was a rite of passage. It meant you were part of the hardcore crowd, the ones who couldn't wait for another minute. There was something surreal about driving home at 12:30 a.m. with a copy of Halo 3 or World of Warcraft in your hands, knowing that while the rest of the world slept, you were about to embark on a grand adventure till sunrise. The memories of those late night drives home, resisting the urge to open the game box at red lights, then finally peeling off the shrink wrap at home in the glow of a TV, are truly unforgettable. In the era of the 90s and 2000s, midnight launches were proof of how gaming could bring people together, turning a simple sale into an unmissable event. The 90s and 2000s truly were a golden age when it comes to the magic of game stores. Whether you were trekking to your local mall's GameStop to trade in last season's hits for a new adventure, or wandering into a hole-in-the-wall independent shop and unearthing a retro gem, each visit was filled with excitement and a sense of community. These memories aren't just about buying games, they're about the experience that surrounded gaming in that era. Game stores were a place of pilgrimage, where the journey was as rewarding as the destination. They were social spaces, learning spaces, and in many ways, dream factories for young gamers. Today, the landscape of gaming has changed, but for those of us who grew up in the 90s and 2000s, we'll always recall that special time when game stores were truly magical. The neon lights, the midnight crowds, the towering shelves of games and guides, all of it lives in our memories, a reminder of the joy of an era gone by. Thank you as always for watching. I truly appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend it with me. While you're here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you want more videos like this one. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I love you. Bye-bye. Older video games had a magical way of making their worlds feel vast and boundless, even with limited technology. Titles like The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, Shadow of the Colossus, The Elder Scrolls III: Morrowind are often remembered for their sense of awe and scale they invoked. Players recall feeling tiny in a massive world, facing towering bosses, or exploring endless fields. This is remarkable given the technical limitations of the time. How did these older games accomplish this illusion of enormity and immersion? And why do so many modern games, despite their bigger maps and better graphics, sometimes feel less mysterious or overwhelming? Let's look at how memory, art design, limited guidance, and mystery contributed to older games feeling massive. Our memories play a big role in how we perceive game worlds. Many of us remember our first 3D adventures as huge. For example, Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field felt endless and full of possibility when we first played it in 1998. In hindsight, that field is actually fairly small and sparse, but our childhood imagination filled in the blanks. Early games often had to leave things to the imagination due to technical constraints, and players eagerly filled those gaps. This design trusts the player's mind to expand the world beyond what's explicitly shown. Older titles similarly trusted players to dream up possibilities. A locked door might hide an entire unseen level. An unreachable background castle could spark legends on internet forums. Nostalgia amplifies this effect. Our memories can exaggerate how large and alive those worlds felt. While modern games can literally be larger, they sometimes leave less room for the player's mind to wander, so everything is laid out in high fidelity. The result is that older games live larger in our memories, the world's expanded by our own imagination. In classic games, art design often trumped realistic detail, creating a grand sense of scale with relatively simple graphics. Developers cleverly used stylistic choices and technical tricks to make environments feel expansive and mysterious. For instance, Shadow of the Colossus embraced a minimalist aesthetic, a hazy landscape of empty valleys and barren caverns, with only a distant silhouette of a colossus in the distance. This sparse world not only sidestepped hardware limits, but it also gave players a feeling of loneliness and grandeur. The vast plains and ruins felt like an ancient forbidden land, bigger than it actually was. In contrast, modern remakes or games often fill every corner with detail. The 2018 remake of Shadow of Colossus is stunning, yet some argue that the added realism changes the atmosphere. The original was akin to an impressionist work, a study in light and silhouette, whereas the remake is more literal and tangible. This highlights a key point. Stylization and suggestion can make a world feel mythic. Older games often use fog or draw distance limits as a feature. A limited horizon meant anything could exist beyond your view, sparking curiosity. By not showing every detail, the world felt mysterious and larger than life. In modern ultra-realistic games, you can often see distant mountains in sharp detail. Impressive, but it also signals to the brain exactly what's there. Striking art direction, even if technically simpler, can evoke a sense of scale and wonder that pure realism sometimes misses. It's the difference between a painted landscape that suggests infinite adventures and a photograph that shows everything plainly. One of the biggest reasons older game worlds felt huge was the lack of hand-holding. These games often dropped you into the world with minimal guidance, forcing you to truly explore. In The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, for example, you're given directions through dialogue and journals. No glowing arrows or GPS markers telling you exactly where to go. A quest might say, head north from town, then west at the river to find the cave. You'd open up your paper map and figure it out. Sometimes you got lost, but in getting lost, the island felt enormous and real. Because you had to navigate the unfamiliar landscape yourself, every journey felt like an adventure. By contrast, when Oblivion and Skyrim introduce ubiquitous quest markers and fast travel, some believe it completely mangles what made Discovery so special. Follow a floating icon from point A to point B turns exploration into a simple connect-the-dots exercise rather than an expedition. Modern open-world games often err on the side of too much guidance. Ubisoft's open-world formula has been especially notorious for map clutter. You open the map and see dozens of icons, objective markers, and dotted lines showing you exactly where to go next. Games like Elden Ring deliberately avoid over-guidance. It places you in a massive world with only minimal hints, much like older titles did. There's no exhaustive quest log, the map has no quest icons by default. Players must pay attention to NPC dialogue or environmental clues, or just wander around and find things on their own. The result? Many players found themselves truly exploring again. That feeling of being lost or not having your hand held can paradoxically make the world feel bigger. Every hill you crest or ruin you stumble upon feels like something you discovered, not something the game just pointed you to. Older games excelled at this. While not open world in the modern sense, games only gave cryptic hints. There's no arrow saying, go here next. You have to recall locked doors or unexplored paths and decide where to try next. Limited guidance forces players to engage more deeply with the game world, studying maps, memorizing landmarks, wondering what lies beyond the visible, all of which enhances the perceived scale. Modern games that adopt this older philosophy show that leaving things to the player's initiative can rekindle that expansive feeling. Beyond navigation, mystery and ambiguity in storytelling and world building make classic games feel immersive and large. Early games didn't bombard you with codex entries or lengthy cutscenes explaining every piece of lore. Instead, story details were often sparse or hidden, which made the world feel more alive beyond our knowledge. You piece together the narrative from item descriptions, cryptic NPC dialogues, and environmental clues. This design was very much intentional. The result is a community of players sharing theories, discovering secrets together, feeling like the world is full of elusive wonders. In Dark Souls, you might defeat a boss and only later realize its significance to the story after reading a ring's description, or you find a hidden path to an area that's entirely optional, which makes you wonder, what else haven't you seen? This kind of mystery makes the game world feel rich and unbounded. There's always another secret around the corner. Older adventure games also have benefited from the pre-internet or early internet era. Mysteries could linger. In the late 90s, playground rumors and magazine articles spread speculative secrets. Was there a way to find the Triforce in Ocarina of Time? Could you resurrect Aerith in Final Fantasy VII? These myths persisted because the games left some things to the imagination and didn't immediately disprove wild ideas. While not all mysteries were intentional, the limited information nurtured a sense that these worlds had depths yet unfathomed. Morrowind, to this day, has quests and artifacts tucked away in corners of the map that many players never find on the first playthrough. There's no checklist pushing you there. You discover them by truly exploring or reading in-game books for clues. Modern titles, in an effort to provide content, often put all their cards on the table. Quest markers and detailed journals mean you're unlikely to miss anything, but that also means the player isn't wondering if there's a hidden quest out there. Modern games tend to heavily script everything. Every character has voiced lines, every major site is tied to a quest, there's less room for the unknown. A game that leans into mystery can make the world feel overflowing with secrets. It invites the player to poke at the edges of the map, to revisit old locations with new eyes, and to speculate about lore. Mystery turns a static map into a living world in the player's mind. It's an element of design that modern games sometimes sacrifice in the name of completeness and clarity. Modern titles present breathtaking vistas that showcase immense landscapes and incredible detail. Today's open-world games are undeniably large in literal size and fidelity. Red Dead Redemption 2 offers an entire American frontier to roam, complete with realistic forests, mountains, and towns bustling with NPCs. Cyberpunk 2077's Night City is dense with skyscrapers, neon signs, and crowds, a level of detail older hardware could never dream of. These games achieve geographic scale and realism that is truly impressive. However, bigger doesn't automatically mean feels bigger in the ways that matter. In some cases, modern games lose that overwhelming mystery that older games had, precisely because they are so detailed and polished. Take Red Dead Redemption 2. It's a triumph of realism where even the horse manure decays over time. Yet the game very much shepherds you through a cinematic narrative. The world is huge, but the game's design often encourages you to stick to the main roads. Stray too far and you might find the edges of the gameplay. There are fewer dungeons or non-story bosses to stumble upon compared to a fantasy RPG. The experience is incredibly immersive, but in a curated way. You're inhabiting Arthur Morgan's life, which is richly detailed but also guided. The mystery is more about the storyline than about the world itself, which is historically grounded. In older RPGs, you might always wonder if there's a hidden quest in that one remote house on the hill. Modern design philosophy often doesn't want players to miss content, understandable from a business player satisfaction standpoint, but by ensuring everything is served to the player, the world can feel more like a checklist than a mysterious realm. Many modern open worlds, such as the typical big-budget RPG or action game, ensure the player knows about all the major locations via map icons or compulsory story missions, meaning there are fewer genuine surprises. Another aspect is pacing and emptiness. Older games often weren't afraid of emptiness. Traveling in Morrowind could mean minutes of seeing nothing but hills and the occasional Nick sound. That emptiness makes the world feel bigger. It also makes finding something feel rewarding. Modern games sometimes fear the player's boredom and pack the world densely. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, for example, peppers the sea with countless question mark icons, so you encounter something every few steps. Ironically, this can shrink the sense of scale because you're constantly being interrupted by points of interest, never alone with the world. The balance between content density and atmospheric emptiness is delicate. When done right, stretches of quiet travel make the world feel expansive and real. When done poorly, too much empty space is boring, but too little space makes the world feel like a theme park. Modern games strive to find this balance, but the trend has been moving towards giving players more to do everywhere, which can undermine the illusion of a vast, untamed world. There's a lot modern games could learn from their predecessors about perceived scale and immersion. First, less can be more. Resisting the urge to explain everything or fill every corner with detail leaves room for players to wonder. A bit of fog, a mysterious locked door, or an unmarked quest can ignite players' curiosity far more than another scripted event can. Modern developers can leverage today's technology without abandoning player imagination. For example, using procedural events or lore tidbits that aren't fully explained to make the world feel alive beyond the player's presence. Exploration should be a journey, not just a task list. Might be time to rethink the overuse of map markers and GPS-style guidance. Players won't complain about being lost if the act of finding the way is engaging. In fact, as we've seen with the success of games like Elden Ring, many players crave that feeling of uncovering the unknown on their own. Modern games can provide gentle nudges, but they shouldn't be afraid to let the players roam free and discover at their own pace. Artistic direction is another lesson. Chasing realism is great, but it should serve the gameplay experience, not overshadow it. Stylized visuals or strategic use of simplicity can make certain aspects stand out more. Shadow of the Colossus taught us that a solitary ruin in a barren land can feel more profound and huge than a city full of copy-pasted buildings. The goal is to spark the player's imagination, to make them feel like there's always more beyond the horizon or beneath the surface. Modern open worlds could intentionally design with a bit of mystery, perhaps even leaving some secrets unmarked and letting the community share stories, the way older gamers used to swap secrets on farms and playgrounds. The games of the past felt bigger, not because of how many square miles their map covered, but because of how they made us feel while exploring them. They trusted our memory and intuition, employed artful design to suggest grand scale, and embraced the unknown. Today's games have the tools to create physically larger worlds than ever, but the sense of overwhelming wonder comes from clever design, not just raw size. By combining modern technology with the old-school philosophies of exploration and mystery, developers can create worlds that not only impress us with their realism, but also rekindle that childlike feeling of stepping into a boundless adventure. Sometimes, to make a game truly feel big, you have to remember what it was like when we didn't need to see everything to believe in a world. The best experiences leave room for the player, and their imagination to roam. What do you think about how open world games have changed over the years? Let me know down below, and while you're down there, maybe like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you want more videos like this. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye. Video games are often praised for their realism, technical achievement, or narrative complexity. But then there's this other class of games, strange, elusive, and hard to categorize. They make players feel like they've woken up inside someone else's dream. These games bend logic, obscure their goals, defy conventional structure, and they prioritize atmosphere over clarity. They aren't just surreal, they feel like dreams, lucid, haunting, and occasionally nightmarish. This isn't simply about art style or music, it's about mood, flow, and a deliberate refusal to explain. So today we're going to look at what makes certain games feel like dreams, and how their disjointed design choices tap into something profoundly human and deeply subconscious. Make sure you let me know down below if you've played any of these games that I'm about to talk about, or if you enjoy this style of game where it's all weird and kooky. Now let's get into the video. I think one of the clearest examples of the type of game we're talking about today is Yume Nikki, a cult classic RPG game created by developer Kikiyama. There's no combat, no dialogue, and no real clear objective. You play as Marutsuki, a silent girl who refuses to leave her apartment during the day. Instead, she explores her dreams, traveling through disconnected, often disturbing dreamscapes filled with looping paths, unnerving imagery, and cryptic interactions. Each area connects in illogical ways. Walking through a door in one biome may drop you in an entirely unrelated environment. Objects and characters often repeat in nonsensical patterns. The infamous Ubwa scene, where flipping a light switch randomly transforms a harmless NPC into a terrifying entity, has become legendary for its uncanny horror. Yume Nikki doesn't offer answers. It demands players surrender to uncertainty. Its slow pacing, eerie ambient soundtrack, and disconnected spaces evoke the sensation of being trapped in a dream that you can't fully wake from. The lack of traditional goals or dialogue reinforces a mood of passive observation, not active participation. It doesn't simulate a dream, it feels like a dream.
Traces of the supernatural reveal themselves more often than intelligent and reasonable men would prefer them to.
While Yume Nikki is dreamlike in its abstraction, Pathologic is dreamlike in its dread. Developed by Russian studio Icepick Lodge, Pathologic is a survival horror game set in a dying town afflicted by a mysterious plague. You play as one of 3 healers attempting to stop the spread of the disease, but nothing goes as expected. The game's systems are hostile by design. Food is scarce, NPCs lie or speak in riddles. Time marches forward whether you succeed or fail. Dialogue feels stilted, intentionally overwritten, as if filtered through a surrealist lens. The buildings feel familiar yet alien. The townspeople wear masks and speak in philosophical abstractions. Every attempt at progress is met with ambiguity and suffering. The dreamlike nature of Pathologic comes not from visual design, but from the overwhelming sense of futility. It echoes the psychological sensation of a stress dream where you're late, confused, and can't make the right decision. You are constantly unsure of what's real or reliable. In many ways, Pathologic weaponizes dream logic against the player, forcing them to question the morality and clarity of every action. The remastered version, Pathologic 2, doubles down on this by refining the systems without removing the strangeness. It is a waking nightmare, equal parts brilliant and harrowing. The result is a game that doesn't feel surreal in the abstract, but oppressive and unshakably subconscious. Anodyne is a game that blends top-down Zelda-style mechanics with surreal storytelling and a pixelated aesthetic. You play as Young, a character who traverses strange environments that may or may not represent parts of his psyche. On the surface, it's a dungeon crawler. Underneath, it's something far more personal. Each zone in Anodyne is symbolic. You explore a crumbling city, a dusty desert, a memory-infused house, or a void filled with eerie silence. The music ranges from melancholic to menacing. NPCs speak in cryptic language that borders on dreamlike poetry. Sometimes their words are abstract musings. Other times they're just chillingly direct, like a passing stranger whispering a truth you had forgotten. What makes Anodyne feel like a dream is its inconsistency. Areas shift tone drastically, mechanics are introduced and discarded, and transitions between spaces feel more emotional than geographical. There's a disconnection between action and consequence, a hallmark of dreams where logic takes a back seat to mood. The game invites the player to interpret, but never confirms any interpretation is correct. At times, Anodyne feels peaceful, at other times threatening, but it always feels personal, like you're walking through someone else's deeply vulnerable, half-remembered memories. So as we've discussed, games like Pathologic lean into dread and Anodyne lean into melancholy. But let's talk about Hylics and how it dives headfirst into absurdity. Created by Mason Lindroth, this game features claymation visuals, word-salad dialogue, and RPG mechanics that make no traditional sense. The protagonist, Wayne, has a head made of a crescent moon and fights sine waves and telepathic bones. It's nonsensical on purpose. Everything about Hylics defies logic. Menus are different to parse, enemies explode into bright blobs, and attacks are named things like disperse mental energy. You don't heal with potions, you eat frozen burritos. In most games, this would be annoying, but in Hylics, it creates a unique flow where nothing is expected to make sense, and somehow that becomes deeply comforting. The claymation art style, paired with lo-fi music and dreamlike visuals, gives Hylics an otherworldly tone. The game doesn't pretend to be real, it leans fully into its subconscious vibe, and it embraces the freedom that comes with rejecting standard storytelling. Hylics feels like a kind of dream where nothing fits together, but everything still belongs. It doesn't ask you to understand, it just asks you to play along. Across the games that we've discussed in this video, several shared design patterns emerge. First is disconnection. Environments that don't logically link, characters that break narrative continuity, or areas that feel removed from a central reality. This mirrors how dreams skip scenes or merge ideas without explanation. There's also emotional priority over clarity. These games often focus on tone or mood more than narrative coherence. Music, lighting, and pacing guide your experience, not objectives or mission markers. Emotional dissonance is common. Comforting scenes may contain hidden menace, while grotesque settings may feel oddly serene. Intentional ambiguity is also a big part of these games. Most of them avoid clear exposition or closure. There's little to no hand-holding, and player interpretation is not allowed. It's required. This creates an experience similar to dream recollection, scattered, symbolic, and always open-ended. And finally, these games often break or obscure mechanics. Tutorials are absent or misleading. Interfaces are cryptic. Rules shift. In Dreams, the world operates under different logic, and these games reflect that through moment-to-moment unpredictability. Not every game is meant to feel like a dream. Most aim for clarity, control, and empowerment. But for a certain type of experience, the dreamlike atmosphere offers something rare: vulnerability, uncertainty, an emotional resonance that transcends literal meaning. Games like Yume Nikki, Pathologic, Anodyne, and Hylics don't just mimic dreams. They speak in a language of dreams. Disjointed, poetic, sometimes terrifying, but always unforgettable. They challenge our expectations and invite us to explore something deeper than mechanics or plot: the subconscious, the irrational, and the unspoken. These are games that linger, not because they told us what to feel, but because they let us feel without explanation. And just like a powerful dream, we may never understand them fully, but we will remember how they made us feel. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. As always, I hope you enjoyed this trippy little look into games that feel like dreams. If you did, maybe go down, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you want more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye. Before data miners, YouTubers, and instant patches, there was something else that kept players up at night. Rumors. Not spoilers, not leaks. Pure, unfiltered video game myths. Lies passed down around the lunch table, scribbled into strategy guides, or shared through cryptic forum posts. Most of them weren't true. Some were clever half-truths, but all of them shaped how we experienced games growing up. In a time when gaming information wasn't instantly accessible, these myths gave our favorite worlds depth, mystery, and a kind of magic that can't be easily recaptured. Whether it was summoning a secret character, unlocking a hidden level, or triggering a cutscene that never actually existed, these legends lived in our heads, and in some cases still do. So let's look into some of the most iconic gaming lies that we all believed, myself included. And as always, I want to hear from you. What was your favorite gaming lie that you heard when you were a kid? Now let's get into the video. Every kid who played Pokemon on the Game Boy had a friend, or was that friend, who swore by the down B trick. The ritual was simple. When the Pokeball wiggles, you press down and B at the same time to increase your chances of capturing the Pokemon. Some kids even threw in the A button, or said it only worked for legendaries. It was never in the manual. There was no in-game prompt, but it felt like it worked. Players would swear they caught Mewtwo or Articuno this way. They believed it because Pokemon was unpredictable. Sometimes that Ultra Ball failed, sometimes the Pokeball succeeded, and when that happened while using the trick, it cemented the lie. Game Freak never implemented such a mechanic. The catch rate is purely mathematical, based on the Pokemon's HP, the strength of the Pokeball, and status effects. But the myth persisted. Even in the Nintendo DS era, and well into the Switch's Let's Go series, some players still instinctively press down B, a reflex built from years of playground pseudoscience. This myth endures not just because of statistical coincidence, but because it gave players a sense of agency. Capturing a rare Pokemon wasn't just about numbers, it became a ritual, a superstition, and a shared belief system that connected a generation of fans. I certainly remember this lie as a kid. I think I even spread it, and I still do it to this day. When I play Pokemon games, I'll hold down B, knowing that it doesn't work, but I still have that muscle memory built into my body even as old as I am now. Do you still hold down and B when trying to catch a Pokemon? One of the most persistent and compelling gaming lies of all time is the idea that the Triforce, the sacred relic of the Legend of Zelda series, is hidden somewhere in Ocarina of Time. The belief stemmed from early screenshots, vague dialogue, and the sheer longing of players who wanted just one more secret in an already legendary game. Players searched every inch of Hyrule. They bombed every wall in the Spirit Temple, tried to glitch into unreachable areas of the castle, and even believed that collecting all the heart pieces or Skulltulas would unlock it. Some even went so far as to interpret cryptic text from the game's code or unused beta content. Nintendo added fuel to the fire by including the Triforce symbol in prominent parts of the game's environment, like above the door in the Temple of Time, and by never outright denying its presence. It took years and extensive reverse engineering by fans to definitively confirm the Triforce is not an obtainable item in Ocarina of Time. Yet the legend was so widespread that fake screenshots and fan-created mods began circulating in the early 2000s, convincing even more people that the Triforce was real. It wasn't just a myth, it became a community obsession, and in many ways, part of the game's unofficial lore.
It's me, Mario! Hello!
I think we all know this next lie. It's one of the most famous gaming lies of the 90s. For years, players swore that Luigi was unlockable in Super Mario 64. And the origin of this lie? A blurry, near-unreadable plaque on a statue in the castle courtyard. To your kids squinting at the screen, the message seemed to say, L is real 2401. That cryptic phrase became legend. Message boards, early gaming websites, and schoolyard gossip exploded with theories. Some said you had to collect all 120 stars and then wait 24 hours and 1 minute. Others claimed you needed to complete the game without dying or discover a hidden green block in the castle. I remember my lie was, you just have to run around the fountain so many times and he'll pop out of the fountain. None of it was true. Luigi didn't appear in Super Mario 64 until the DS remake, and the mysterious plaque, it's still debated to this day. Some say it was an internal joke, others think it was a test texture. Nintendo never offered a clear answer, which only made the myth stronger. But the lie had a side effect. It made players explore Super Mario 64 in microscopic detail. In trying to find Luigi, kids uncovered all sorts of real secrets, hidden one-ups, ghostly piano scares, and weird glitches. In that way, Luigi's ghost gave the game a second life. Now, it was found in that big Nintendo leak that happened a few years ago that it was intended for Luigi to be in the game, but that it just didn't really pan out, and no, there's no secret way to get him in the N64 cartridge. There are few gaming moments that hit as hard as Aerith's death in Final Fantasy VII, so naturally, players wanted to undo it. And almost immediately, rumors spread that you could. Maybe not easily, maybe not in the main game, but there had to be a way, right? Some players claimed that if you mastered all the materia or maxed out Cloud stats, a cutscene would trigger. Others swore you could use a secret Phoenix Down in a hidden location. There were even elaborate guides that talked about completing obscure side quests or interacting with every save point in the game. None of it was true, sadly. Aerith's death is permanent. That was the point. But the myth lingered for years, especially as PC modders began creating fake revival cutscenes and alternate timelines. Some were convincing enough to fool less savvy players. What kept the lie alive was hope and the emotional weight of the moment. Players weren't ready to say goodbye, so they created their own narrative. One where death wasn't final. One where a favorite character could come back. And for many, that fantasy was enough to keep the game alive long after the credits rolled. I remember thinking about this a lot because I had spent so much time leveling up Aerith only to have her die and permanently leave the party. It was frustrating, and when people told me that you could bring her back to life, I tried everything, only to find out that it wasn't true. Alright, be honest with me. If you were a kid in the 90s with access to the internet and the game Tomb Raider, you've probably heard about this one and tried it yourself. The legend of a secret code that would render Lara Croft completely nude was one of the most infamous rumors in gaming. Unlike other myths, this one was steeped in tabloid interest and early web culture. Entire websites were dedicated to the so-called Nude Raider code. Magazines teased its existence. Because Tomb Raider was one of the first games with a prominent female protagonist rendered in 3D, the lie spread like wildfire. Of course, no such cheat ever existed. Core Design and Eidos repeatedly denied it. But the internet being what it is, modders eventually created unauthorized patches for the PC version that did exactly what the hoax claimed. That blurred lines between myth and mod, and created a confusing legacy. I think this lie says more about the culture of the era than it does about the game itself. It reflected the growing pains of video games becoming mainstream, and how players, especially adolescent ones like myself at the time, projected their curiosity onto digital spaces. Again, be honest with me. Do you remember this lie, and did you try to make it happen? It's fun to look back at a time in gaming where information was not readily available, and lies like the ones we talked about today ran rampant. Today, secrets are data mined within hours. Developers debunk rumors in real time. But back in the day, a whispered rumor could transform a game. The possibility of what might be hidden behind a door, beneath the map, or inside the code was as exciting as anything the developers actually created. These lies weren't just lies, they were shared dreams. They made games feel larger than life, infinitely explorable, and full of magic. And while these lies may not have been real, the sense of wonder they inspired absolutely was. We believed. And for a while, that was enough to make it feel true. Hey, thank you very much for watching this video. I always appreciate people taking time out of their day to spend it with me and my videos. If you like this one, make sure you go down, like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you want more videos like this. As always, I appreciate you, I love you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. When most gamers hear the words brutally difficult boss, their minds immediately jump to From Software games. Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring have made frustration into a celebrated design philosophy. But let's not kid ourselves, grueling, soul-crushing boss fights existed long before these games came out. There's a rich history of legendary encounters across all genres that didn't need a parry button or iframe dodge to make players suffer. This isn't about the usual suspects, no Ornstein and Smog, no Malenia. This is about the hidden monsters, the unpatched nightmares, and the unfair but iconic battles that shaped gaming long before FromSoft became the face of pain. Let's talk about some of the hardest bosses in gaming history. And as always, I want to hear from you down below what you think the hardest boss in video game history is. Let me know. And let's get into the video.
You are already dead. Your courage will fail.
Cthulhu from World of Warcraft was never going to be beaten, at least not in the state he launched. When players finally reached him at the end of the Temple of Ahn'Qiraj in 2006, what they encountered was not just a difficult boss, but a fundamentally broken one. His mechanics were mathematically impossible to overcome. He had eye beams that bounced from player to player across the raid room, and these dealt exponential damage, and it made it nearly impossible to survive more than a few seconds. If you made it past that phase, which required pixel-perfect positioning and instant reflexes from all 40 players in the raid, Cthulhu would then swallow players into his stomach, a phase where you had to fight off adds while coordinating simultaneous damage inside and out. All of this occurred while dealing with healing restrictions, unpredictable tentacle spawns, and a tight DPS check. And just when guilds thought they had a strategy, his regeneration and unpredictable mechanics would crush their hopes. Top raiding guilds, with players who had conquered everything up to that point, simply gave up. Forums lit up with theories and complaints. Blizzard eventually confirmed what many suspected. Cthulhu was literally unkillable in his original form. The developers had made a miscalculation in his tuning. He wasn't just hard, he was technically impossible. After several weeks, Blizzard nerfed him, dialing back damage and simplifying certain phases. Even then, he remained one of the most difficult raid bosses in MMO history. Cthulhu wasn't just a fight, he was a moment. Proof that player ambition could sometimes outpace developer expectations. Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat 2 wasn't just hard, he was infuriating. Most fighting game bosses in the arcade era were designed to be cheap, rigged to take your quarters. But Shao Kahn went above and beyond. His AI would read your inputs in real time. The moment you pressed a button, he had already begun countering it. He was faster than most characters, hit harder. His shoulder charge could juggle you into oblivion, and his hammer attack was uninterruptible. Block strings didn't work, combos would drop for no reason. There was no consistent strategy other than exploiting AI flaws, and even then, he would often outpace you. He also taunted you constantly. His gravelly voice, "You weak, pathetic fool," burned into your brain every time he landed a hit. It wasn't just a fight, it was psychological warfare. And when you lost, which you would do repeatedly, he would laugh, standing over your character like a smug titan. Beating Shao Kahn was a rite of passage, not just in arcades, but on home consoles as well. He represented the kind of difficulty that didn't just challenge your reflexes, but tested your resolve. In an era before difficulty sliders and practice modes, Shao Kahn was the final wall between you and victory. And more often than not, he won.
It all began with a stone. or so the legend says.
So we've already talked about one very difficult raid boss, let's talk about one more. And if you think raid bosses are hard, meet Absolute Virtue, a boss in Final Fantasy XI so legendarily difficult that it went undefeated for nearly 2 years after its introduction. He was the ultimate super boss in the Chains of Promathia expansion and was meant to be tackled by alliances of players. The fight itself was a cascading nightmare of mechanics pulled from previous boss encounters. Massive HP pools, ability spam, and unpredictable status effects. He could charm your entire party, interrupt casting, one-shot tanks, and teleport around the battlefield. On top of that, he had a frustrating ability to regenerate large chunks of health, undoing hours of hard work in minutes. The Final Fantasy XI community responded with forums full of theories. Some believed there were secret weapons or quests that had to be completed first. Others thought it required some obscure trigger mid-fight. Square Enix, for their part, offered only cryptic messages saying the boss was designed to test coordination and skill. Eventually, players managed to defeat Absolute Virtue, but only after several patches that adjusted his behavior, and even in his nerf state, he remained brutally difficult. The sheer length of the battle, many attempts lasting over 12 hours, and its punishing mechanics, made him one of the most controversial and unforgettable encounters in MMO history. Long before modern difficulty spikes, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out gave players one of the most infamous final bosses of the 8-bit era. And unlike many NES games that were hard because of bad controls or glitches, Tyson was perfectly designed, impossibly fast, brutally strong, and entirely fair. The fight begins with a punch that knocks you out instantly. No warm-up, no tutorial. If you're not ready, it's over. The rest of the fight is a masterclass in pattern memorization and precise timing. You need to learn exactly when to dodge, when to counter, and how to conserve your stamina. Tyson doesn't make mistakes. If you do, you're done. What's even more impressive is that Punch-Out gives you no special tools or upgrades. You're Little Mac, a tiny underdog with the same moveset from the start of the game. Victory is entirely based on execution. Beating Tyson wasn't just a goal, it was a badge of honor. It meant you had mastered one of the hardest tests in reflex-based gaming at the time. For decades, Tyson has remained a symbol of NES-era toughness. He's still referenced today as one of the best designed and most punishing boss fights ever made. If you played Undertale like a good person, you might never meet Sans in battle. But choose violence, pursue the genocide route, and you'll be forced into a fight that turns the entire game on its head. The battle begins before you can even act. Sans immediately hits you with a flurry of bones, breaking all expectations of turn-based RPGs. Unlike other enemies, he dodges your attacks. He inflicts constant damage through a unique mechanic called KR, or Karma, and his attacks come in brutally fast, randomized waves that require platforming-level reflexes to dodge. The fight includes over 20 unique attack phases. There's no healing between turns, no breaks to regroup. Your only chance is to survive, learn each pattern by heart, and execute them perfectly. All the while, Sans chats with you, sarcastically commenting on your choices, making it clear that this isn't just a boss fight, it's judgment. What elevates the encounter is its emotional and narrative weight. Sans knows what you did. He's not just a difficult opponent, he's the game's moral compass, throwing everything he has at you to stop your rampage. Winning doesn't feel good, it feels like a tragedy. For many, the Sans fight is one of the most uniquely challenging and unforgettable encounters in modern gaming. It requires mechanical mastery, but it also delivers on the promise of storytelling through gameplay. While From Software may dominate the discord around difficult bosses these days, they're far from the only source of pain in gaming. Across genres, from fighting games to MMOs, 8-bit classics to indie gems, developers have been testing player skills and patience for decades. The bosses we covered aren't just hard, they're milestones. They test reflexes, strategy, and endurance. They force players to grow, adapt, and sometimes rage quit. And in the end, they stay with us, not just as challenges, but as stories we pass down like digital legends. So the next time someone says Malenia is the hardest boss of all time, remind them of Absolute Virtue's healing phase, Shao Kahn's mind-reading AI, or Sans' Bone Barrage intro. Difficulty didn't start with Souls, and it probably won't end there either. Hey, thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate you spending some time with me. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you go down, like, subscribe, and maybe hit the notification bell if you want more videos like this. Thank you as always for watching. I love you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Sequels are supposed to be more of the same. Bigger, shinier, more polished, but fundamentally familiar. That's what fans expect and what publishers usually demand. But every so often, a sequel dares to be different. It doesn't just continue the story, it reinvents the world, the gameplay, or even the entire tone. It breaks expectations, often at great risk, and sometimes ends up becoming more iconic than the original. So let's look at some rare sequels that didn't just follow in their predecessors' footsteps, but carved out an entirely new path. From dramatic tonal shifts to radical mechanical overhauls, these games show us what happens when developers ask not, how can we make more of this, but what if we did the opposite? As always, let me know down below what game sequel completely shifted what you expected when it came to the series that it was a part of. And now let's get into the video. After the groundbreaking success of Ocarina of Time, most studios would have doubled down on its formula: sweeping adventure, noble heroism, and grand dungeons. But Majora's Mask took a hard left turn. It gave us a strange, melancholic tale set in a doomed world that ends in every 72 in-game hours unless Link intervenes. Rather than expanding Hyrule, it trapped players in a tight, looping timeline where repetition wasn't just a mechanic, it was the narrative core. Instead of collecting medallions, you collect masks. Each one represents a different identity or social role, and some even transform Link into different creatures, complete with unique abilities. The transformation masks, the Deku, Goron, and Zora mask, weren't just cosmetic. They changed how Link moved, fought, and interacted with the world. Suddenly, puzzles weren't just about solving logic problems, they were about embodying another being and navigating their struggles. The time loop mechanic forced players to live in the routines of NPCs, learning their fears, patterns, and moments of vulnerability. You couldn't save everyone. Some characters were doomed by design. The side quests became windows into the quiet desperation of the world's inhabitants, many of whom continued about their lives knowing the moon was going to crash down on them. It was existential dread in Nintendo form. This dramatic departure from Ocarina alienated some of the fans at the time, but has since become one of the most beloved entries in the series. It's a game about grief, anxiety, and acceptance, and its willingness to break the Zelda mold is what gave it lasting power. Majora's Mask wasn't just a sequel, it was a challenge to what a sequel could be.
Resident Evil 4.
The first 3 Resident Evil games defined survival horror. Fixed camera angles, limited ammo, puzzle box mansions, and creeping dread. But by the early 2000s, the formula was starting to feel dated. Enter Resident Evil 4, which blew up everything that came before it and redefined what the series and the genre could be. The switch to an over-the-shoulder camera was revolutionary. It placed the player right behind Leon Kennedy, offering both increased tension and more fluid control. The combat was faster, the enemies were smarter, and the entire pacing of the game shifted from methodical horror to frantic action. The villagers of Pueblo weren't mindless zombies. They coordinated attacks, dodged bullets, and carried chainsaws. Instead of claustrophobic corridors, you navigated through diverse and massive environments. There were villages, castles, island compounds. Each setting introduced new enemies, new challenges, kept the gameplay fresh for the entire runtime. The tone was also notably campier. Leon quipped one-liners while battling towering monstrosities, and for some reason this all worked. Resident Evil 4 was a massive commercial and critical success, and influenced everything from Dead Space to The Last of Us. Without Resident Evil 4, some of these games might not exist. The gameplay loop of shooting, upgrading weapons, and managing a grid-based inventory system was so satisfying that it became the new standard. Capcom took a huge risk by shifting away from their established formula, and yet it paid off in a way that few sequels ever have. Final Fantasy X was a sweeping, emotional journey through a world grappling with death, faith, and sacrifice. It ended with one of the most bittersweet conclusions in the series as protagonist Yuna said goodbye to her love and returned to a world forever changed. Ten 2, its direct sequel, was radically different in tone, style, and structure. The opening cutscene alone made the difference clear. Yuna, previously a soft-spoken and serious person, was now dancing in a concert stadium, kicking off a narrative far more upbeat and stylish than its predecessor. Rather than a solemn pilgrimage, Ten 2 followed a trio of female leads, Yuna, Riku, and Pain, as they traveled Spira in search of spheres and self-discovery. The job system, known as Dress Spheres, allowed players to change classes mid-battle with flashy animations. This introduced layers of strategy unseen in Ten's combat system, allowing for fast-paced, combo-heavy gameplay. The narrative was non-linear, filled with optional missions and multiple endings. So while many fans initially rejected the tonal whiplash from Ten 2 has since been reevaluated as a brave and progressive game. It focused on female friendship, post-trauma recovery, and self-expression in a way few games of the time dared to. What seemed like a bubblegum detour became a cult classic. The original Darksiders was a gritty, post-apocalyptic mix of Zelda puzzles, God of War-style combat, and comic book storytelling. It was a linear, combat-heavy experience with War, one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, as a central figure. It leaned heavily into religious and mythological imagery. Darksiders 2 changed nearly everything. You play as Death, agile counterpart to War. The world expanded dramatically into interconnected regions with side quests, dungeons, and towns. Combat system was overhauled with loot drops, combo chaining, and RPG elements including stat upgrades, gear customization, and a branching skill tree. The tone also became more mystical and philosophical. Death's journey wasn't about vengeance, it was about redemption, balance, and challenging fate. The environment shifted from grim wastelands to ethereal realms filled with ancient constructs, forgotten gods, and fallen kingdoms. Though it didn't match the commercial success of its predecessor, Darksiders 2 proved that the franchise could evolve beyond its influences. It was ambitious, experimental, and far more expansive. For many, it was the moment Darksiders stepped out of the shadows of its inspirations and became something distinct. The God of War series had long been synonymous with visceral violence, button-mashing carnage, and adolescent rage. Kratos was more force of nature than character, tearing through Greek mythology in a whirlwind of blood and vengeance. By 2010, the formula was beginning to wear thin. Enter God of War 2018, which was a reinvention in every sense. Set in Norse mythology, it transformed Kratos from a wrathful god to a remorseful father. The camera shifted to an intimate, over-the-shoulder view with no cuts, and this created a sense of closeness and gravity. Combat became more grounded, deliberate, and tactical, and this focused on positioning, timing, and use of the Leviathan axe. But the real shift was emotional. Kratos was now guiding his son through a world of gods and monsters, while grappling with his own past. Their relationship evolved over the course of the game, revealing layers of vulnerability and growth rarely seen in action games. The game also featured sprawling, interconnected environments, Metroidvania-style exploration, and RPG systems. It maintained the epic scale of the original trilogy while infusing it with a maturity and restraint that stunned fans and critics alike. It didn't just bring the series back, it reinvented what a reboot could be. When sequels break the mold, they risk alienating fans, but they also have the power to redefine what a series can be. The games we looked at today didn't just offer more content, they offered new perspectives, new mechanics, and new emotional truths. They remind us that video games are not static. They grow, evolve, and sometimes completely transform. From Majora's Mask existential melancholy to God of War's heartfelt maturity, these sequels weren't afraid to challenge expectations. They showed that real evolution comes not from doing more of the same, but from daring to ask deeper questions and take bigger risks. It's not always easy to embrace a sequel that changes everything, but when it works, it can elevate a franchise from good to legendary. So the next time a sequel does something completely unexpected, maybe we give it a second look, and it might just be the evolution you never knew the series needed. Hey, thank you as always for watching this video. I always appreciate you coming by and spending your day with me. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, maybe go down and consider subscribing, hitting the like button, and ringing that notification bell if you want more videos like this in the future. As always, I appreciate you, I love you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Beating the final boss in a JRPG is supposed to be a moment of triumph. Screen fades to white, the orchestral theme swells, and the credits roll in satisfaction. But in some games, the ultimate confrontation, the showdown the story's been building to for dozens of hours, isn't the hardest battle in the game, and it's not even close. There's a special kind of design philosophy where developers tuck the real challenge into optional content. Hidden bosses, secret dungeons, or post-game nightmares that make the final boss look like a warm-up. So today, let's look at 6 JRPG games that trick you into thinking you've conquered them, only to reveal a much greater challenge for the truly daring. As always, let me know down below if you've faced off against any of these challenging JRPG bosses. Let's get into the video. In Chrono Trigger, the final boss Lavos is a massive, dramatic encounter that represents the end of time itself. The fight is satisfying and well-earned, and it caps off a time-hopping adventure filled with memorable characters and emotional arcs. But the true challenge doesn't necessarily lie at the end of the main story. Chrono Trigger was one of the first RPGs to popularize New Game Plus and multiple endings. It allowed players to confront Lavos at different points in the story, each with varying difficulty. One of the hardest and most infamous challenges is facing Lavos early in the game, before your party is truly prepared. This version of the boss is borderline unfair, its attacks are relentless, and the margin for error is razor thin. Attempting this battle during your first playthrough usually results in a humiliating defeat, but New Game Plus players began to take it on as a badge of honor. Then there's the DS version, which introduced an even greater challenge, the Dream Devourer. Hidden in a side quest accessible only near the end of the game, the Dream Devourer is a fusion of Shala and Lavos, an enemy that not only builds upon Lavos' strength, but ties directly into the lore of Chrono Cross. This boss is brutal, combining powerful magic, status effects, and incredibly high HP. It's not just difficult, it's a thematic continuation of the story that recontextualizes the entire Chrono saga. Beating it doesn't unlock a happy ending, but it does unlock knowledge, a deeper understanding of the world and its tragic underpinnings. In both battles, players encounter something rare, a final boss that surpasses the story's climax in difficulty and narrative weight. It's a perfect example of a game rewarding mastery with deeper storytelling. While the original Persona 5 ended with a climactic battle against Yaldabaoth, Persona 5 Royal adds an entire new semester with a new palace and antagonist, Dr. Maruki, a cognitive science expert turned reality-bending god. Maruki challenges your party with complex mechanics, multiple phase transitions, and an emotionally charged narrative about grief and idealism. It's a phenomenal final boss battle that adds layers to the already dense story. But even Maruki isn't the hardest fight in the game. Enter Lavenza, formerly the Velvet Room Twins, now restored into her true form. Lavenza is an optional boss fight, only available in New Game Plus and under strict conditions. Lavenza is essentially a turn-based puzzle as much as she is a fight. Each of her turns is designed around specific counters, resistances, and phases that require you to exploit exact weaknesses or face devastating consequences. She changes resistances constantly, using moves like Debilitate, and summons high damage personas like Sentinel and Lucifer. You'll need a well-prepared protagonist with an arsenal of custom-fused personas and maxed-out stats, often built over dozens of hours. The fight isn't just hard, it's clinical. It demands complete mastery of the game systems, buffs, debuffs, elemental affinities, turn order manipulation, and persona fusion depth. Players who brute force the rest of the game with raw stats or over-leveled strategies are suddenly humbled by a fight that feels like a final exam designed by a sadistic professor. Lavenza doesn't have the emotional weight of Maruki's battle, but she more than earns her place as Persona 5 Royal's ultimate challenge. It's a reward for those who mastered every system the game has to offer, and a reminder that in some games, the true final boss doesn't come at the end of the story. It comes when you're finally good enough to handle it. Kingdom Hearts 2 ends with a dramatic, cinematic clash between Sora, Riku, and the villainous Xemnas. It's a flashy, satisfying finale for the game. But if you thought this was the hardest fight in the game, you're wrong. Because tucked away in the post-game content is Lingering Will, a secret boss so powerful and unpredictable, he makes Xemnas look like a warm-up. Lingering Will is the empty armor of Terra, a character that was introduced in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. But in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, he's an in-game superboss who appears in the Keyblade Graveyard, waiting for anyone brave or foolish enough to challenge him. What makes him so formidable is not just his lore, but his aggressive, almost player-like fighting style. He's fast, smart, and he adapts. He uses Terra's Keyblade and command styles with brutal precision. He punishes button mashing and demands perfect reflexes. His combos are long, his attacks hit like trucks, and he doesn't give you time to breathe. Unlike many bosses in the game, Lingering Will isn't a flashy spectacle, he's a test of everything you've learned. The fight requires total mastery of the game's combat systems. You'll need to perfectly time reflect, manage magic, maintain spacing, and punish only when safe. Even then, victory isn't guaranteed. He has multiple devastating phases and can even cancel some of your counterattacks. Beating Lingering Will feels like defeating a manifestation of the game itself, a final reckoning with your own skills. He's not required, he's not canonically essential, but for many fans, Lingering Will is the final boss of Kingdom Hearts 2, not because of the story, but because of the unforgettable challenge he delivers. Xenoblade Chronicles is an expansive RPG with a powerful story, philosophical themes, and a world that feels truly alive. The final boss, Zanza, is a satisfying narrative conclusion, but in terms of sheer difficulty, he doesn't hold a candle to the game's super bosses. These optional enemies, often level 99 or higher, are scattered across the world and require immense preparation to defeat. Each one has unique abilities, resistances, and patterns. Some can chain one-hit kills, others regenerate health rapidly, and a few can inflict status effects that will cripple your party. Taking them down requires optimal party composition, full affinity charts, and a deep understanding of the combat system's complex interplay between aggro, break, topple, daze combos, and chain attacks. The most notorious among them, the Avalanche Abasi, is a flying tyrant located at the top of Bionis' shoulder. He's level 120, 20 levels higher than the cap, and boasts devastating attacks that can wipe out your party in seconds. To even stand a chance, players will have to grind out gear, complete side quests for skill trees, and exploit every possible advantage. These super bosses are the true test of your understanding of Xenoblade's mechanics. They're not just stat checks, they're puzzles requiring strategy and perseverance. And the satisfaction of defeating one far surpasses the moment you put Zanza down for good. Final Fantasy IX is a whimsical, heartfelt RPG with a final boss that fits the story's emotional arc. Necron is a decent challenge, but he's no Ozma. Ozma is an optional super boss hidden in the Chocobo's air garden, and unlike Necron, Ozma doesn't give you a chance to prepare. The battle starts instantly, and his attacks come fast and unpredictably. He can cast Meteor, Curse, Holy, and Flare, all in a single turn. He can reflect magic, heal himself, and hit your entire party with debilitating status effects. The RNG alone makes this fight feel insurmountable at times. To defeat Ozma, players need specific setups: auto haste, auto life, reflect null, and status immunities. Even then, victory often comes down to careful turn planning and a bit of luck. Some players attempt to beat Ozma without using any damage boosting trances, just to prove they can. You can complete the friendly monster side quest, which will give you some advantages. Ozma is no longer to be out of reach, so you can hit him with physical attacks, and he'll be weak to shadow damage. Beating Ozma rewards you with bragging rights, a powerful accessory, and the satisfaction of overcoming one of the toughest Final Fantasy bosses ever designed. He's not tied to the plot, but he's tied to the sense of mastery of the game. In Dragon Quest VIII, the final boss, Rapthorn, is a bombastic fight with powerful attacks and a multi-phase battle. But for those who delve into the Drogovian trials, optional content accessible only after completing the main game, the real challenge awaits. The Drogovian Sanctuary introduces a gauntlet of enemies, culminating in a fight with the Drogovian Lord, a shape-shifting boss who assumes multiple dragon forms, each more powerful than the last. This boss doesn't just hit hard, he tests your entire knowledge of the game's systems, from tension building to proper party rotations, and effective use of spells like Kabuff and Omni Heal. Winning unlocks even harder versions of the fight, where the Drogovian Lord gains new elemental resistances and enhanced attack patterns. The final form can wipe your party in a few turns if you're not perfectly prepared. Beating the Drogovian trials is seen by fans as the true completion of Dragon Quest VIII. It turns an already long and rewarding game into an endurance test, proving once and for all that you've mastered every aspect of your party and their abilities. And in complete transparency, I have never done this. Dragon Quest VIII was one of the hardest RPGs I ever played, and I never even got close to doing something like this. Final bosses are meant to leave a lasting impression. They tie up narrative threads and offer a climactic confrontation. But as these games we talked about today show, the hardest fights are often tucked away, waiting for those brave enough to go looking for them. These hidden or optional bosses offer more than just a challenge. They offer legacy. They become the moments we talk about years later, the battles that truly tested us. Because while beating the final boss might finish the story, it's these secret encounters that define our experience. So the next time you see the credits roll, ask yourself, was that really the end, or just the beginning of the real challenge? Hey, thank you so much as always for watching my video. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend it with me. If you enjoyed this video, maybe go down, subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell if you want more videos like this. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye. Today we're talking about tutorials. They set the tone, teach you how to play, and offer the first glimpse into the world you're about to inhabit for hours, or even days. But more often than not, those initial moments are boring, bloated, too talky, too slow. The tutorial level, once a clever way to ease players into a new experience, has become a stumbling block for many modern games. Instead of creating wonder and engagement, the opening minutes often suffocate the player with exposition dumps, redundant button prompts, and painfully linear segments where failure is impossible and creativity is discouraged. But it wasn't always this way. In fact, some of the most iconic games in history, Super Mario Bros., Half-Life, Portal, taught players everything they needed to know without ever feeling like a lesson. So how did we get from elegant, intuitive onboarding to overly long tutorials that feel more like lectures than adventures? Let's look at the curse of the tutorial level, what makes them fail, which games still get it right, and why tutorials can make or break the entire experience. In the early days of gaming, tutorial levels were rare. Arcade titles like Donkey Kong or Pac-Man relied on simple mechanics and instant feedback. You learned by doing, trial, error, and a few lost quarters. Home console games of the 8-bit and 16-bit era followed suit. Think about the opening of Super Mario Bros. On the NES. Within seconds, you're running, jumping, collecting coins, and avoiding Goombas. No text boxes, no NPCs, no walls of dialogue, just play. But as games grew more complex, especially during the PlayStation 2 and Xbox 360 generations, developers felt the need to explain more. RPGs, open-world games, and story-driven experiences introduced crafting systems, skill trees, companion AI, inventory management, and world lore that demanded context. And so, tutorials began to bloat. Take Assassin's Creed 3, for example. While the game eventually opens up to a sprawling historical playground, the tutorial section locks players into a multi-hour prologue where they play as a different character, before the real protagonist even appears. While narratively justified, this decision led many players to abandon the game before even reaching the real story. The same issue plagues titles like Final Fantasy XIII, where players spend nearly 20 hours in a highly linear corridor before gaining access to the game's open-world content. The result? Players feel like passive observers rather than active participants. They're told how to do everything, usually more than once, and rarely given the chance to discover mechanics organically. Tutorials, instead of inviting players into a world, often become a barrier to entry. To me, one of the most common sins of the modern tutorial is information overload. Instead of integrating teaching moments into gameplay, many titles opt for front-loading everything through menus and pop-ups and dialogues. This is particularly egregious in genres like MMOs, tactical RPGs, or complex sim games. Let's use The Elder Scrolls Skyrim as an example here. It throws players into the chaos of a dragon attack, forcing them to move, interact, and make choices immediately. But even this amazing game succumbs to exposition fatigue shortly after. There are long conversation and info dumps that slow the momentum. Other huge titles offer dense tooltips and tutorials that assume players are prepared to digest 10+ mechanics in rapid succession, often through unskippable pop-up windows. Perhaps the most infamous example as a modern offender of this is Metal Gear Solid V: The Phantom Pain. While the game is widely praised for its sandbox stealth gameplay, its opening tutorial hospital sequence drags for over 45 minutes. Players are guided through every basic action, sometimes multiple times, and much of the sequence involves crawling slowly while Kojima's signature surreal storytelling unfolds. While immersive for fans, it's a daunting intro for newcomers. Even action games fall prey to this. Kingdom Hearts 2, one of my favorite games, is a classic example. Players spend nearly 3 hours in the Twilight Town prologue playing as Roxas, doing menial jobs like mail delivery. Though it sets up important story threads, the pace is glacial, and many first-time players were left wondering if the game would ever truly begin. Not all hope is lost, though. Many titles, often regarded as classics, prove that tutorial design can be elegant, exciting, and completely invisible. Let's look at Half-Life. Its tutorial isn't labeled as such. You begin in the Black Mesa Research Facility, riding a tram and soaking in environmental storytelling. You explore the lab, interact with NPCs, push buttons, and ultimately trigger a disaster. All while learning the rules of the world. There's no HUD clutter, no overbearing hand-holding, just a slow but steady ramp up to chaos. You know how to play by the time enemies show up, and you never felt like you were being taught. Portal is another example of this, and a great one. It starts with a single room and a portal. The early test chambers are bite-sized puzzles, each introducing one mechanic at a time. The game trusts the player to experiment. No pop-up windows, no voiceovers explaining button layouts, just gameplay as instruction. By the time things spiral into narrative-driven madness in the back half of the game, the player feels completely equipped to handle any challenge. Celeste, the indie platformer by Matty Thorson, also exemplifies excellent tutorial pacing. The first few screens teach jumping, dashing, and wall climbing, each introduced organically through level design. There's little text, but tons of visual cues. The game then builds upon those basics with increasingly complex challenges, creating a sense of mastery through action, not explanation. And of course, we talked about it earlier, Super Mario Bros. Still holds up as one of the greatest silent tutorials ever made. World 1-1 teaches acceleration, momentum, enemy avoidance, power-ups, and level progression, all without saying a word. It's pure genius in less than a minute. With so many games competing for our time, first impressions are more important than ever. If a player buys a game and the first hour is slow, overly complicated, or just dull, they're far more likely to drop it and never return. The explosion of free-to-play and Game Pass-style offerings means players have countless other options at their fingertips. This isn't just a pacing problem, it's a trust issue. Modern players want to feel like they're part of the world, not attending a digital seminar. A good tutorial teaches through experience, and a bad one lectures. Developers must balance accessibility with engagement. Yes, new players need to learn the controls, but they also need to feel the magic. They need to believe the world is worth exploring, the system's worth mastering. When tutorials are done right, they're invisible. When done wrong, they're all you remember. And the curse of the tutorial level is real. It plagues even the most promising games, turning what should be an invitation into an obstacle. But the best developers know better. They know that players don't want to be told how to play, they want to be shown. They want to discover, and that discovery should happen through movement, action, and immersion, not text boxes and button prompts. The next time you boot up a game and find yourself in an overlong prologue or swimming in pop-ups, just ask yourself, is this game trying to teach me, or is it just afraid I won't understand it? And if you ever feel the frustration creeping in, take comfort in the fact that some games, like the ones we listed, Portal, Half-Life, Celeste, Mario Brothers, they still trust you to figure things out on your own. Because the best games don't need tutorials, they are tutorials. They just never let you realize it. So what are your thoughts on tutorials? Do you like the way they're done now, or would you like to kind of go back to where we weren't over-encumbered with text and how-tos? Let me know down below, and while you're there, maybe like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you want more videos like this. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye. Every console has standout titles, but only a few achieve legendary system seller status. Games so compelling that people buy a piece of hardware just to play them. System seller doesn't always have to be the most technically advanced or even the best game in the library. Sometimes it's about timing, novelty, or cultural appeal. Think of Tetris making the Game Boy an everyday accessory, Halo turning LAN parties into a phenomenon, or Mario 64 showing what 3D gaming could be. These games are more than just entertainment, they're statements of intent. They say, this is what our console can do, and you can't find this experience anywhere else. So let's take a look through gaming history to see which games define their consoles, and in some cases, save them. When the NES launched in the US in 1985, the industry was still reeling from the 1983 crash. Consumers had lost faith in home consoles after being burned by poor quality games on the Atari 2600 and its competitors. Nintendo had to rebuild trust, and they did so with Super Mario Bros. Super Mario Bros. Wasn't just a game, it was an experience unlike anything before. Its scrolling levels, hidden warp pipes, power-ups, and precise controls showcased depth and polish that arcade machines couldn't replicate at home. The NES became the Mario machine, and for years afterward, people would describe their systems not as an NES, but as a Nintendo. Not long after, The Legend of Zelda provided a different reason to own the system. Its golden cartridge and massive open world captured imaginations. Unlike Mario's linear journey, Zelda encouraged exploration, puzzle solving, and persistence. It introduced save files via the internal battery, allowing players to continue epic quests instead of starting over. For many, Zelda proved that consoles could deliver deep, complex adventures, not just quick arcade-style thrills. Even niche NES hits had system-selling qualities. Metroid, with its haunting alien atmosphere and non-linear world, appealed to gamers who wanted something darker and more exploratory. Even Duck Hunt, which was bundled with the NES Zapper, became a must-have party piece. People bought the console just to laugh at that smug dog. Together, these titles revived the home console market and established Nintendo as the household name in gaming. By the early 90s, Sega and Nintendo were locked in a battle for living room dominance. Sega's answer to Mario was Sonic the Hedgehog. With blinding speed, colorful levels, and a spiky blue mascot full of attitude, Sonic embodied the Genesis edgy image. Kids who wanted to be cool begged their parents for a Genesis just to play Sonic, and when Sonic 2 launched in 1992, it sold millions of copies and made blast processing a playground buzzword, even if the term was mostly marketing fluff. Meanwhile, Nintendo countered with Super Mario World for the SNES. Its massive overworld, Yoshi Companion, and polished platforming set a new bar for side-scrollers. Then came The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which showed that the SNES could deliver sprawling adventure worlds richer than anything on the NES. But it wasn't just mascots. Street Fighter II, for example, became the definitive fighting game of its era, and the SNES version outsold arcades themselves in some regions. Owning a Super Nintendo meant having the Street Fighter experience at home. Later, Donkey Kong Country stunned the industry with pre-rendered graphics, convincing many players that the SNES was still cutting edge despite the looming 32-bit generation. Meanwhile, Sega countered with Mortal Kombat. Unlike Nintendo's censored SNES version, Sega kept the gore intact on Genesis, and it paid off. Parents may have been horrified, but teenagers rushed to buy the Genesis version for the real experience. This generation proved that sometimes a single game, or even a single controversial feature, could tip the balance of the console wars. There was a new competitor as Sony's PlayStation entered in the mid-90s with an arsenal of iconic titles. None loomed larger than Final Fantasy VII. The move from Nintendo to Sony shocked fans, and Square's RPG showed off the power of CD-ROM storage with full motion video, a sprawling world, and a cinematic story that mainstream audiences connected with. Many bought a PlayStation just to play Final Fantasy VII. It was that influential. But PlayStation had more than one killer app. Gran Turismo turned into the best-selling PlayStation franchise, offering unprecedented realism for racing fans. Metal Gear Solid redefined what storytelling in video games could be, and Resident Evil pioneered the survival horror genre, cementing Sony's system as the place for groundbreaking experiences. On the Nintendo 64 side, Super Mario 64 revolutionized 3D gaming. Moving Mario in full 3D space was nothing short of magic in 1996, and for many, including myself, it justified buying an N64 instantly. Then came The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, which still tops greatest games lists today, GoldenEye 007, which created a multiplayer phenomenon. Split-screen battles in basements and dorm rooms sold countless consoles, and Pokemon Stadium gave fans a reason to transfer their beloved creatures from handhelds to TV screens, further boosting N64 sales. Then there was Sega. The Sega Saturn unfortunately struggled in the West, but it did have a system selling titles in Japan. Virtua Fighter was a launch success and convinced many arcade fans to buy a Saturn. Later, Panzer Dragoon Saga and Nights into Dreams became cult classics that defined the system's identity, though they couldn't save it from poor marketing abroad. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the handheld dominance of the time. When the Game Boy launched, competitors like the Game Gear boosted better graphics, but the Game Boy had Tetris. Bundling the game was a masterstroke. Its addictive, universal appeal made the Game Boy transcend age and culture. Suddenly, handheld gaming wasn't niche, it was mainstream. Then came Pokemon Red and Blue. More than just games, Pokemon was a cultural tidal wave. Kids didn't just want a Game Boy, they needed one to trade, battle, and catch them all. The link cable turned Pokemon into a social event, and the game's success extended the Game Boy's life by nearly a decade. Later, handhelds had their own sellers. The Game Boy Advance had Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, Advance Wars, and Golden Sun. The Nintendo DS had Nintendogs and Brain Age, which expanded the audience to casual players and even grandparents. And the PSP became a massive hit in Japan thanks to Monster Hunter Portable 2nd G, which created a cultural ad hoc of multiplayer meetups. We're going to start this next section off with the PlayStation 2, as it's the best-selling console of all time, and a big reason for that was its library of system sellers. Grand Theft Auto 3 changed open-world gaming, while Vice City and San Andreas made it a cultural phenomenon. Millions bought a PS2 just for GTA. Add in Gran Turismo 3, Final Fantasy X, and Metal Gear Solid 2, and the PlayStation's dominance was undeniable. But of course that wasn't the only console of this generation. Microsoft's Xbox was new, but games like Halo Combat Evolved gave it an instant identity. LAN parties, co-op campaigns, and tight shooting mechanics made it a must-have. Halo was so tied to the Xbox brand that for years they were inseparable. Nintendo's GameCube had Super Smash Bros. Melee, which became not just a system seller, but a competitive scene still alive decades later. Metroid Prime and The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker were also defining titles, though the Cube's smaller library hurt its long-term reach. And then I can't forget about what was one of my favorite consoles of this generation, the Sega Dreamcast. While it was short-lived, it had its own sellers. Soul Calibur was so stunning graphically that it drew players to the console. Shenmue, one of my favorite games of all time, offered an unprecedented open-world life simulation. And Phantasy Star Online introduced many to console-based online play. For fans, these were reasons enough to own a Dreamcast. Now let's cover the most modern eras from the Wii up to where we are now. The Wii was practically carried by Wii Sports. Motion controls were intuitive, family-friendly, and addictive. Retirement homes and schools bought Wiis for this one game. Later, games like Mario Kart Wii and Super Smash Bros. Brawl kept the momentum going. For Xbox fans, they had the Xbox 360, Gears of War, and Halo 3 were the big sellers, alongside Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. Xbox Live became the social hub of a generation, and these titles made sure no teenager wanted to be left out. On the Sony side, the PlayStation 3 struggled early but found its footing with games like Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, Little Big Planet, and The Last of Us. These cemented Sony's identity as the home of cinematic storytelling. Now the most recent generations with the Switch, Switch 2, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and the Xbox One, each console still has its system sellers. The Nintendo Switch has all kinds of system sellers. It launched with The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and followed that up with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and Animal Crossing New Horizons. PlayStation boasts games like Spider-Man, God of War, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Bloodborne. Xbox's strategy shifted a little bit. The Xbox One struggled, but Halo Infinite, Forza Horizon 5, and especially Game Pass became the selling points of the Xbox ecosystem. In a way, Xbox's system seller is now a subscription service. System sellers are more than just popular games. They're moments in time where hardware and software align perfectly. From Mario resurrecting the NES to Halo launching the Xbox brand, these games defined generations. They were reasons to gather, reasons to argue in playgrounds, and reasons to beg parents for new consoles. And even today, when games are cross-platform and streaming is on the rise, people still ask the same old question when a new console drops. What game does it have that I can't play anywhere else? Hey everybody, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to watch this video. I really appreciate it. If you liked it and you're new here, think about clicking that subscribe button, hitting the like button, or maybe ringing that notification bell if you want more videos like this in the future. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye. Video games often pride themselves on being the ultimate medium of interactivity. Unlike books or films, games give you agency. You're not just watching a story unfold, you're shaping it. Or at least that's the idea. Your choices matter, they tell us, but dig a little deeper and you'll find something unsettling. In many games, your choices are just smoke and mirrors, cosmetic, superficial, illusions. Whether it's choosing between dialogue options that all lead to the same outcome, or selecting a faction that changes a few cutscenes but not the core story, many games are masters at making us feel like we're in control, even when we aren't. So why do we fall for it? And what does it say about how we interact with games? Let's look at the illusion of choice, how developers craft it, why it works, and where it starts to fall apart. Perhaps the most common example of false choice comes in the form of dialogue systems, especially those pioneered by games like Mass Effect, The Walking Dead, and Dragon Age. At first glance, you're crafting a version of your character through every choice. Paragon or Renegade, honesty or deception, sympathy or cruelty. These interactions often feel intimate and reactive, but in many cases, the dialogue options are carefully funneled to converge back to a fixed outcome. Whether you try to save a character or abandon them, the game might have already decided their fate. In Telltale's The Walking Dead, players were famously told Clementine will remember that. But did she? The game often brought choices back to the same key plot beats no matter how you played. Developers use this trick because branching narratives are expensive. If every choice had major consequences, the game's scope would balloon exponentially. Instead, they create the feeling of branching, a clever magic trick of branching out slightly, then converging back onto a shared path. It works, at least for a while, but once players realize their decisions don't carry long-term weight, the magic sort of fades, the illusion breaks. Another form of illusory choice appears in games with faction systems. I'm going to use Elder Scrolls Skyrim as an example, where you can join the Stormcloaks or the Imperials. At first it seems like a world-altering decision. Siding with one army over another should ripple across the game world. But in reality, the consequences are minimal. A few NPCs change their lines, a few flags are swapped out, but the world continues largely as it did before. Cities don't fall, regions aren't reshaped, the economy doesn't shift. It's cosmetic in the grand scheme, and for a game that sells itself on sandbox freedom, that realization can be a bit deflating. The same goes for many RPGs and MMOs. Players are presented with big choices, who to support, what side to fight for, but those choices rarely lock off meaningful paths or alter the gameplay in any substantial way. Why? Because developers don't want to cut off content for players. Instead of splitting the game in half, they offer a light dusting of consequence and then move on. The player feels powerful for making a choice, but the world remains eerily static, and the more this pattern appears, the more players learn to stop expecting real change. Do you remember the karma meters from games like Infamous or Fable? Morality systems were once a staple of RPGs and action games alike. Be good and the world sees you as a hero. Be evil and your character sprouts horns and gets a darker ending. It seemed like a revolutionary idea. Shape your narrative through moral decision making. But morality systems often boil down to binary extremes. You either save the puppy or you kick it off a cliff. And most games rewarded players for committing fully to one side. Dabbling in both usually meant missing out on powers, rewards, or key story beats. So players stopped role-playing and started min-maxing. Worse, the consequences were often superficial. Whether you were a shining paragon or a ruthless villain, the main plot usually played out the same. You might get a different final cutscene, but the road to get there didn't change much. In Fable, choosing to be good or evil changed your appearance and a few townsfolk reactions, but the story structure remained largely intact. These systems encouraged choice, but not complexity. They created the illusion of moral depth without requiring the player to actually wrestle with tough, ambiguous decisions. Let's talk about open world games. They have the illusion of freedom that extends beyond the story. It's baked into the world itself. Games like Cyberpunk 2077, Watch Dogs, and Horizon Zero Dawn present vast cities and landscapes filled with NPCs, interiors, and background events. You can go anywhere, do anything, or so it seems. But try to open half the doors in those cities. Try to interact meaningfully with the majority of NPCs. More often than not, those doors are locked, and those characters are non-reactive. The world is painted with the suggestion of depth, but it's more like a movie set, a carefully designed illusion. Even choice-heavy RPGs like Fallout 4 or Dragon Age Inquisition give players a sense of autonomy while pushing them along heavily scripted paths. Side quests may vary and companions might come and go, but the main story is usually locked in place. You can wander, sure, but when it's time for the plot to move forward, there's usually just one route through. This isn't inherently bad, it's a necessity of game design. But when marketing promises that every choice matters, and the reality is a funnel, players begin to question how much their actions really mean. So if so many of our choices are illusions, why do we keep falling for them? Because choice, even when it's fake, feels good. It gives us this sense of agency, of control, ownership over the story. Even if we end up in the same place, how we got there felt personal. Games that excel at this illusion often do so by focusing on context, not consequence. It doesn't matter if all roads lead to the same battle. If the conversations along the way reflect your choices, you still feel heard. If a companion reacts to your playstyle, if your alignment affects dialogue tone, that illusion becomes part of your immersion. Mass Effect may have converging storylines, but players still remember the tension of choosing who lives and dies. The Walking Dead may bring everyone to the same endpoint, but the emotional weight of each moment lingers. The illusion is a tool, and when used well, it can make a tightly scripted story feel dynamic and alive. That said, some games do offer real branching. Undertale's a great example as it changes dramatically depending on your choices, from the pacifist run to the brutal genocide path. Disco Elysium offers wildly different playthroughs based on your skills, dialogue, and behavior. The Witcher 2 literally splits its second act into two entirely different game paths depending on one major choice. These games aren't afraid to cut off content to make your decisions permanent. They sacrifice completeness for consequence, and in doing so, they earn something far more valuable: authenticity. Your version of the story might not be the same as someone else's, and that makes it feel real. But these are exceptions, not the rule. Most games can't afford that level of divergence, so they compromise, crafting the illusion of freedom while keeping things manageable under the hood. The illusion of choice is one of gaming's greatest tricks. It gives us agency without breaking the narrative. It lets us believe we're shaping the world, even when we're gently nudged back onto the rails. And in all honesty, that's okay. Not every choice needs to branch. Not every decision needs to rewrite the world. What matters is whether the game respects the feeling of choice, whether it makes us feel like we matter. But the next time a game promises that your choices will shape the world, take a moment to look behind the curtain. Are you really choosing your path, or are you just picking your flavor of the same journey? Either way, if the experience resonates, maybe the illusion was well worth it. As always, thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to spend it with me and watching this video. I appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, maybe go down and think about subscribing, liking, and hitting that notification bell if you want more videos like this in the future. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye. There's a special kind of satisfaction in seeing numbers rise. Your gold total doubling, your damage output climbing into the billions, your idle currency increasing even while you're away. Classic games like Cookie Clicker and newer games like Vampire Survivors don't offer epic stories or complex mechanics. Instead, they're built around a simple hypnotic core. Click a thing, earn a number, and use that number to make the next number grow faster. And somehow that loop is wildly addictive. But what is it about passive progression that keeps us hooked? Why are games with minimal interaction, sometimes called idle or incremental games, so capable of dominating our time and attention? And how does something like Vampire Survivors, which requires just one stick and one button, create a dopamine drip more intense than many AAA blockbusters? Today we're going to look at the design of passive gameplay, the psychology of feedback loops, and our very human obsession with watching numbers go up. The roots of the idle genre trace back to the early 2010s with web-based games like Progress Quest, a parody RPG where your character plays itself without any player input. But the genre truly exploded with Cookie Clicker in 2013. Created by a French developer, what began as a browser-based joke about compulsive resource gathering quickly turned into a genre-defining hit. In Cookie Clicker, you start by clicking a giant cookie to earn 1 cookie per click. You can use those cookies to buy grandmas, farms, factories, and portals that produce cookies automatically. Before long, you're making billions of cookies per second. The gameplay barely evolves, yet players return for days, weeks, even years. The genius of Cookie Clicker lies in its elegant feedback loop. Every action, no matter how small, contributes to progress. There's always something just out of reach, a new upgrade, a better multiplier, a golden cookie that boosts production for 30 seconds. The pacing is expertly tuned so that players are never far from the next reward. This constant trickle of progression is what makes idle games so compelling. Clicker games tapped into a market of players who wanted low commitment, high reward experiences. Games that could run in the background of daily life, quietly rewarding attention and inattention in equal measure. To truly understand the appeal of watching numbers go up, we have to understand the psychology behind reward systems. Video games, like social media and slot machines, operate on what psychologists call variable ratio reinforcement, rewards that are unpredictable but always within reach. This taps into the brain's dopamine system. Dopamine is often mistaken as the pleasure chemical, but in reality, it's about anticipation. It's what drives us to seek out the next reward, the next upgrade, the next big number. Idle and incremental games are dopamine machines. They drip feed progress at a constant rate, ensuring that there's always a reason to check back in. Every time you earn enough to unlock a new unit or see a pop-up telling you plus 1 million damage, your brain gets a little hit of satisfaction. And then it wants more. The math doesn't even need to make sense. Numbers go from thousands to millions to sextillions, but the human brain doesn't care about scale. It just knows that progress is happening. In fact, as numbers get bigger, the rewards feel more meaningful, even if they're entirely abstract. Earning 10 cookies per second is fine. Earning 1 billion cookies per second feels amazing. And these idle games turn simple math into emotional highs. So if Cookie Clicker defined the idle genre's passive roots, Vampire Survivors redefined it by combining passive progression with light interactivity. Released in late 2021 by indie developer Ponkel, Vampire Survivors took the gaming world by surprise. The player only controls movement, attacks are automatic, enemies pour in from all sides, you collect XP gems, level up, choose new weapons, and evolve those weapons into more powerful forms. At first glance, it seems too simple, but within minutes the game becomes a dazzling spectacle. Your screen fills with explosions, projectiles, swarms of bats, and skeletons. Numbers fly everywhere. Damage output increases exponentially. And at the 30-minute mark, you might be doing millions of damage per second. What makes Vampire Survivors brilliant is how it disguises an idle game as an action roguelike. You move and dodge, sure, but the real satisfaction comes from the exponential growth. You start weak, and by the end you're literally a walking apocalypse. It scratches the same itches traditional clickers, but adds just enough interactivity to feel engaging. Every run gives you the chance to optimize builds, experiment with synergy, and push your personal high scores. And like Cookie Clicker, there's always another upgrade around the corner. These incremental games aren't just mindless, they're meticulously designed. Developers use a variety of tricks to make sure players stay engaged. One of these tricks is the Prestige system, where players reset their progress in exchange for permanent bonuses. This one step back, two steps forward mechanic encourages repeated playthroughs and long-term investment. Games like Clicker Heroes, one of my personal favorites, Realm Grinder, and games like Adventure Capitalist all use Prestige systems to extend gameplay indefinitely. The reset gives a fresh dopamine loop while still making the player feel more powerful with each cycle. Another powerful trick is number inflation. When damage goes from 100 to 100 million, the feeling of power increases, despite the enemies scaling equally. The illusion of growth is enough to satisfy the brain's reward system. Idle progression while offline is another major hook. Games reward you for not playing. You close the app, go to work, come back to a windfall of resources. Feels like progress without effort, a digital version of passive income. This taps into the fantasy of control and efficiency, giving players the sense that they're mastering a system even when they're away. So here's the million-dollar question. Are these games actually fun, or are they just good at exploiting our brains? For many players, these games are comforting. They're stress-free, goal-oriented, and non-punishing. There's no losing, no pressure, just steady advancement. In a world full of uncertainty and overcomplicated entertainment, idle games provide something refreshingly simple: progress. But there's a darker side. Some critics argue that idle games are barely games at all, just interactive screensavers engineered to manipulate. Their addictive nature, lack of challenge, and monetization, especially on the mobile end, raise concerns about ethical design. Yet there are others that defend them as meditative, even therapeutic. For players with anxiety, ADHD, or limited free time, idle games offer a sense of accomplishment and calm. They can be played while doing other things, allowing for relaxation without the pressure of traditional gaming. Like any genre, their value lies in how they're played and why. So whether it's a cookie counter, a sword that swings itself, or a damage number too big to comprehend, incremental games tap into something primal. The joy of watching numbers go up is the joy of immeasurable success. It's visible progress, reward for attention, and a little taste of control in an otherwise chaotic world. From Cookie Clicker to Vampire Survivors, these games succeed not by overwhelming players with complexity, but by creating a feedback loop so satisfying that we can't help but come back again and again and again. Because in the end, maybe that's what games are all about: the illusion of progress, the pleasure of growth, and the thrill of one more upgrade. And if I'm being honest, I'll probably check back in 5 minutes to see how many cookies I've made. Hey, as always, thank you very much for hanging out and watching the video with me today. If you enjoyed it, maybe go down, click like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you want more videos like this. I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye. Not every game needs booming guns, sprawling dialogue trees, or cinematic cutscenes to leave an impact. Some games whisper instead of shout, using minimalism, atmosphere, and subtle mechanics to convey powerful emotional experiences. These are the quiet games, the ones that might only last a few hours but linger in your mind for years. Games like Journey, Inside, and Abzu may seem simple on the surface, but beneath their serene exteriors lies a deep well of storytelling, environmental design, and emotional resonance. They represent a new philosophy in game design, one that trusts the player to engage with the world intuitively, to feel rather than be told. Today we're looking at how these quiet games challenge conventions, reshaped expectations, and influenced the broader gaming industry. When Journey was released in 2012, it quietly redefined what multiplayer and storytelling in games could be. It had no spoken dialogue, no tutorial, and no named characters. You play as a robed figure in a vast desert, traveling toward a distant mountain. That's it. But the simplicity is deceptive. The emotional power of Journey comes from how it uses visuals, music, and shared experience to tell a story that feels deeply personal. The most groundbreaking element is its anonymous co-op. Other players appear in your game, but you can't speak to them or see their usernames. You can only chirp and move together, and yet many players report forming intense emotional bonds with their partners. You might explore together, solve environmental puzzles side by side, or help each other through harsh winds and cold peaks. When the journey ends, you learn who they were only after the credits roll. Journey proves that connection doesn't require voice chat or cutscenes. It uses movement, light, and shared goals to build something more organic. The developers designed every area and musical cue to subtly guide emotion, loneliness, awe, despair, triumph. The emotional arc mirrors Joseph Campbell's hero's journey structure, but without any of the text. Its impact on the industry can't be overstated. It showed that AAA level polish could exist in a minimalist indie title. It was nominated for a Grammy and influenced countless games from Rime to Sky, Children of the Light. Journey wasn't just a quiet game, it was a quiet revolution. Inside was developed by Playdead in 2016, and it's a spiritual successor to their earlier game Limbo, but with far more refined sense of visual storytelling and mechanical design. In it, you control a boy running through a bleak, surreal world filled with authoritarian undertones, grotesque experiments, and eerie machinery. There's no HUD, no dialogue, no text, just movement, silence, and implication. What makes Inside so powerful is its trust in the player's ability to interpret. Every scene is meticulously crafted to guide emotional response. Facilities where humans are harvested like cattle, a final sequence that defies all logic and yet feels inevitable. All of it's shown, never told, and all of it is deeply unsettling. The puzzles are intuitive but tightly designed, forcing players to slow down and absorb their surroundings. Every mechanical element, from swimming through submerged labs to controlling mindless drones, reflects larger themes of autonomy, control, and dehumanization. Inside doesn't explain its world. It lets you live in it and lets your discomfort fill in the blanks. It does an incredible job of environmental storytelling. Critics and developers alike point to Inside as a benchmark in tone, pacing, and atmosphere. Its influence can be seen in games like Little Nightmares, Somerville. In an age of exposition-heavy storytelling, Inside reminded the industry of the power of restraint. Abzu is a scuba diving journey through vibrant underwater ecosystems. While the game shares DNA with Journey, it brings a new focus: harmony ecology, and meditative play. There's no enemies, no failure states, no timers or health bars. Instead, you swim, you interact with fish, you activate ancient technology, and you gradually piece together the story of a lost civilization through murals and visual cues. The game is structured around flow, the psychology of losing oneself in an activity, and that flow is beautifully reflected in the game's mechanics and audiovisual design. The soundtrack by Austin Wintory swells and recedes like tides, and this syncs perfectly with your actions. Schools of fish respond to your movement. Hidden meditative spots let you sit and simply watch the ocean come alive. The result is a deeply relaxing experience that still delivers emotional punch. Abzu was praised for offering a peaceful alternative to the adrenaline-heavy fare that dominates the industry. Its impact helped pave the way for other ambient, contemplative titles like The Pathless, Sable, and Spiritfarer. It also reinforced the idea that games could be artful without being aggressive, that calm, beauty, and introspection are just as valid as challenge and spectacle. Shadow of the Colossus was released in 2005 for the PlayStation 2 and is a game defined by its quiet. The world is massive and empty, filled with ancient ruins, wind-blown plains, and vast, lonely silence. You ride your horse aggro across this mythical landscape to confront 16 towering colossi, each one a puzzle and a boss battle wrapped into one. What sets Shadow of the Colossus apart is how it uses minimalism to evoke deep emotional responses. There's very little dialogue, no traditional dungeons, no crowds of enemies. The soundtrack only swells during colossi encounters, retreating into haunting ambience between fights. The journey is contemplative, one of solitude, reflection, and growing dread. Every victory feels bittersweet. The colossi aren't evil, they're majestic, almost mournful, and with each one you slay, the tone darkens. The game never tells you outright that you might be doing something wrong, but it hints at that, through camera angles, through Wander's changing appearance, through the way the world responds. The subtle storytelling, combined with its breathtaking art direction and scale, made Shadow of the Colossus a landmark title. It influenced countless games focused on minimal UI, environmental exploration, and emotional ambiguity, and this includes Breath of the Wild, Death Stranding, and even Journey itself. It's a quiet giant in the history of gaming. A Short Hike is a 2019 indie game that proves even the smallest worlds can leave a lasting impression. You play as Claire, a bird spending a summer at a mountainside park, trying to get cell phone reception by hiking to the summit. That's the premise. But within this tiny sandbox lies a heartfelt, relaxing journey. Unlike other open world games, A Short Hike has no combat, no fail states, and no pressure. It encourages aimless exploration, casual interaction with charming NPCs, and simple side activities like fishing or gliding. The game's pixel art meets 3D aesthetic is warm and nostalgic, with a dynamic soundtrack that reacts to your movement. What makes A Short Hike so special is how it captures the feeling of summer solitude, a sense of discovery, calm, and personal growth that comes from doing nothing in particular. It's about the little moments, helping someone find a lost item, stumbling upon a secret path, or just sitting on a bench to enjoy the view. Its impact has been surprisingly large for such a small project. It's been praised by developers for its density, its charm, and its ability to tell a meaningful story with very few moving parts. It shares thematic DNA with Animal Crossing, Celeste, and Undertale, all while maintaining its own distinct identity as a cozy, quiet adventure. These games didn't dominate headlines with their marketing budgets. They didn't need blockbuster voice casts or hundreds of hours of gameplay. Instead, they asked players to listen, not to dialogue, but to the spaces between, to the mood, to the motion, to the feeling of simply existing in a crafted world. They changed the industry not by being loud, but by being still. They opened the door for a wave of similarly understated experiences. What Remains of Edith Finch, Gone Home, Gris, Unravel, all owe something to the groundwork laid by games like Journey and Inside. In a gaming landscape often obsessed with content and conquest, these quiet titles remind us that sometimes less is more, that silence can be powerful, that a game can move you without ever saying a word, and maybe that's the most revolutionary idea of all. Hey, thank you so much as always for taking time out of your day to spend it with me and watch this video. I appreciate it very much. If you enjoyed and you're new here, maybe think about going down, hitting that subscribe button, the like button, and ringing that notification bell if you want to see more videos like this in the future. As always, I love you, I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. Every gamer has it, the pile of shame. A stack of unplayed or half-finished games sitting on a shelf, crammed into a Steam library, or downloaded through a subscription service. We buy them with good intentions. I'll get around to this one soon, we tell ourselves. But weeks turn into months, and months turn into years. Meanwhile, the backlog keeps growing. And this isn't just a personal problem, it's a cultural shift. The rise of sales, bundles, and subscription services has made it easier than ever to collect games faster than we can play them. And somewhere along the way, finishing a game became less important than simply owning it. To understand why our backlogs keep growing, we need to look at both the industry's changing business models and the psychology of being a gamer in the modern era. In the 80s and 90s, backlogs didn't really exist for most players. Games were expensive, often $50, $60, and new releases came out at a slower pace. For many kids, getting a new game was a rare treat, a birthday present, a holiday gift, or maybe one big purchase after months of saving allowance. This scarcity meant that players wrung every ounce of content out of the games they had. Beating a game wasn't optional, it was necessary. You replayed Super Mario Bros. Over and over, tried to find every secret in The Legend of Zelda, or challenged yourself with higher difficulties in Street Fighter. Because you only had a handful of cartridges, you lived with those games, and mastery was part of the experience. Even when you rented games, you felt an urgency to complete them before they had to be returned. That urgency created stories of all-night marathons, desperate attempts to reach the end before the rental store deadline. Older gamers didn't have backlogs. They had one or two titles they knew inside and out. The 2000s changed everything. Digital distribution on PC, spearheaded by Valve's Steam platform, made it possible to buy games without physical production costs. And birthed from Valve's Steam platform came the infamous Steam sale. For the first time, you could pick up entire libraries of games for the cost of one retail release. That obscure indie game you heard about? It's $3. That classic RPG you missed 10 years ago? It's bundled with 2 sequels for $10. Suddenly, buying games became less about committing to playing them and more about collecting them just in case. This mentality grew into the modern backlog culture. Games were no longer scarce, they were abundant. And abundance led to overconsumption. It felt smart to buy more than you could ever play because the deals were too good to ignore, and the backlog was born. Now, if Steam sales gave players too much choice, subscription services supercharged the problem. Xbox Game Pass, PlayStation Plus, and even services like EA Play or Ubisoft Plus gave players access to hundreds of games for a flat monthly fee. On paper, this is incredible value. For the price of one retail game, you can sample dozens. But psychologically, it creates a new kind of backlog anxiety. You scroll through the catalog, paralyzed by choice. Do you commit to a 100-hour RPG or dabble in a shorter indie game? Do you replay an old favorite or chase the newest release? The result is what psychologists call the paradox of choice. The more options you have, the harder it becomes to make a decision. And when you finally do choose, you often second-guess yourself, worrying that you picked the wrong game. Instead of focusing on enjoying what you're playing, you're already thinking about what else you could be playing. Subscription services and services like Steam feed into the backlog not just because they offer too much, but because they encourage a buffet-style mentality. You sample everything, finish nothing, and always feel behind. So why do unfinished games weigh so heavily on us? Part of it is cultural. Gamers have long tied identity to completion. Beating a final boss, finishing a story, or getting 100% completion used to be the ultimate bragging rights. But in the modern era, finishing everything is nearly impossible. Open world games now span hundreds of hours, live service titles demand daily engagement, side quests, collectibles, and DLC bloat mean that even completing one game can feel like a full-time job. For many, the backlog becomes a reminder of failure, all the things you should have played but didn't. There's also a fear of missing out. Gaming moves fast, and communities shift quickly from one release to the next. If you haven't played the hot new release, you're left out of the conversations, memes, and spoilers. So you buy it, intending to keep up, but it just joins the backlog when you don't have the time to dive in. Psychologists studying consumer behavior note that unfinished games can still provide satisfaction. Simply owning them, or even starting them, creates a sense of accomplishment. The purchase itself scratches the itch, even if the game never gets completed. It's why people hoard books, movies, or even workout equipment they never use. The idea of playing is often as rewarding as the act itself. But the backlog problem isn't just about psychology, it's also about how the industry has evolved. Developers and publishers have leaned into practices that make backlogs inevitable. There's open world bloat, games like Assassin's Creed, The Witcher 3, or Elden Ring that offer massive worlds, but also dozens of optional activities, side quests, and collectibles. These encourage exploration, but they also turn games into time commitments too big for many players. Games with live service models, like Fortnite, Destiny 2, and Call of Duty Warzone, are designed to be ongoing. They never end, meaning that finishing them is impossible by design. Playing them often means neglecting other titles in your library. What about annual releases, sports games, shooters, and franchises like Call of Duty or FIFA release yearly, making it easy for players to fall behind. If you miss a year, you may feel like it's not even worth catching up. And of course, we can't forget bundles and freebies. Epic Games' regular free game giveaways, humble bundles, and subscription perks have trained players to collect games almost passively. The backlog grows even if you didn't pay directly for the additions. The industry thrives on abundance because it drives engagement and sales, but it leaves players overwhelmed. The modern backlog isn't going away. If anything, it's only going to get bigger as subscription services expand, digital sales continue, and live service games dominate more of our time. For some, that backlog is a source of guilt, a reminder of unfinished tasks. For others, it's a library of possibility, a comforting collection of experiences waiting for the right moment. It helps to reframe it not as a pile of shame, but as a personal archive. You don't have to finish everything. You don't have to enjoy what you have time for. Maybe that's the lesson of the backlog. Gaming has grown too large, too diverse, and too fast for anyone to keep up. Instead of seeing the backlog as a burden, we can see it as proof of abundance. We live in an age where there are more great games than we could ever play in one lifetime. That's not failure, that's opportunity. This is a story of gaming's evolution. From the scarcity of the cartridge era, to the abundance of Steam sales, to the endless buffet of subscription services, the backlog is a reflection of how the industry has changed. It's also a reflection of us, our desires, our anxieties, and our love for the medium. Backlogs remind us that gaming isn't just about beating the final boss, it's about the experiences we collect, the moments we savor, and the stories we tell ourselves about what we'll play someday. So don't stress about your backlog too much. The truth is, every gamer has one, and in its own way, a pile of shame is really a pile of possibilities. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I appreciate you taking a little time out of your day to spend it with me. If you enjoyed the video and you're new here, maybe go ahead and think about clicking that subscribe button, the like button, and ringing that notification bell if you want more videos like this in the future. I love you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye. There's a reason why we still talk about final bosses decades after a game's release. There's not just another enemy or challenge, they're the culmination of everything the game has been teaching us. The level design, the combat mechanics, the story, and even the music all come together for one last test. A great final boss serves as both an exam and a performance. It forces you to use the skills you've honed throughout the game, but it also gives you a moment of spectacle, something memorable that sticks in your mind long after the credits roll. Sometimes the boss is impossibly huge, filling the entire screen. Other times it's personal, a duel against a rival who's been taunting you since the beginning. And occasionally, the most powerful final bosses are the ones who subvert your expectations, not by being massive and terrifying, but by being intimate and even tragic. The way final bosses are designed has changed dramatically over the years, and their evolution tells us a lot about how video games themselves have evolved. From simple pattern-based fights of the 8-bit era to the sprawling cinematic showdowns of today, let's look at the history and evolution of the final boss. The earliest days of gaming were defined by simplicity. Hardware limitations meant developers couldn't create sprawling cutscenes or multi-phase battles. Instead, they relied on patterns. Bosses weren't complex AI-driven enemies, they were puzzles disguised as monsters. Let's start from the beginning. Let's take Bowser in the original Super Mario Bros. He didn't have a complicated moveset or deep mechanics. He walked back and forth, occasionally breathing fire. The challenge came from the level around him, the narrow bridges, the fire bars, and the bottomless pits. Beating Bowser wasn't about brute force, it was about recognizing the pattern and executing with precision. Yet for millions of players, toppling Bowser felt like conquering the ultimate evil. Dr. Wily in the Mega Man series was another 8-bit staple. His fortress wasn't just one fight, it was a series of escalating battles. First came the boss rush, where you had to refight every robot master. Only then did you face Wily himself, usually piloting some elaborate machine with multiple forms. These fights were still rooted in patterns, but they asked players to master the unique weapons they collected throughout the game. And even outside of Nintendo's icons, 8-bit bosses carried the same design ethos. With Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, where it gave us the most intimidating final boss in sports games, Tyson himself, who had devastating one-hit knockdowns if you weren't ready. It was less about learning his patterns and more about enduring the sheer intensity of the fight. These early boss fights weren't flashy, but they set the template. They taught players that the end of a game should feel bigger, harder, and more satisfying than anything that came before. With the jump to 16-bit hardware, bosses became larger, more elaborate, and more cinematic. Developers could use bigger sprites, more detailed animations, and booming soundtracks to make final bosses feel like true climaxes. One of the most memorable examples is Mother Brain from Super Metroid. She begins as a grotesque head in a jar, much like in the original Metroid, but halfway through, the glass shatters and she reveals a towering, monstrous body. Her screen-filling form was shocking in 1994, and the fight itself was relentless, pelting Samus with devastating beams. What really made the battle unforgettable, though, was the scripted moment where Samus is saved by the sacrifice of the baby Metroid, an early example of narrative and gameplay blending seamlessly in a boss fight. Over on the Genesis, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 gave us the Death Egg robot. This towering machine was a stark departure from Sonic's usual bosses. No rings meant one mistake could cost you the entire fight, and the sheer size of the robot made it feel like you were facing impossible odds. For many kids, including myself, defeating the Death Egg was a badge of honor. RPGs in this era raised the bar even higher. Final Fantasy VI's battle against Kefka is legendary. After spending the second half of the game ruling as a god, Kefka is confronted in a multi-tiered showdown, complete with heavenly backdrops and one of Nobuo Uematsu's most iconic themes, Dancing Mad. The fight wasn't just a test of mechanics, it was a narrative climax, the moment when you finally toppled a tyrant who had literally destroyed the world. There were other titles that followed suit. Chrono Trigger's Lavos was not only a tough fight, but a flexible one. Players could encounter him at multiple points in the story, leading to different endings. This was revolutionary for the time, making the final boss feel dynamic rather than fixed. The 16-bit era made it clear. The final boss wasn't just the hardest fight, it had to feel epic, combining gameplay, presentation, and narrative stakes. The jump to 3D in the mid-90s completely redefined what a final boss could be. No longer confined to 2D planes, bosses could now fill entire arenas, chase you across stages, and demand mastery of 3D movement. Super Mario 64 reimagined Bowser in this new space. Instead of hopping over to him to grab an axe, players had to run around an open arena, grab his tail, and swing him into spike bombs. The fight emphasized everything Mario 64 had taught players about 3D platforming: movement, camera control, and spatial awareness. By the final showdown in the sky, Bowser had more attacks, more bombs to hit, and an unforgettable final roar as he is defeated. On the RPG front, Final Fantasy VII delivered one of the most iconic final bosses of all time, Sephiroth. His multi-phase battle, complete with apocalyptic attacks like Supernova, tested everything players had learned over dozens of hours. But what made Sephiroth stand out was the presentation. Full-motion video cutscenes, orchestral music, and the sheer weight of his villainy throughout the game. He wasn't just a boss, he was a cultural icon. Shooters also embraced cinematic finales. GoldenEye 007 ended with a tense duel against Trevelyan atop a collapsing satellite dish. It's not the hardest fight in the game, but it was dripping with narrative stakes. The boss wasn't just a faceless enemy, it was your former ally turned rival. And of course, I can't forget about probably the most notable boss of this era, which is Ganondorf and Ganon in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. First in his castle, then an escape sequence, and finally a showdown against his monstrous form. The fight combined story, atmosphere, and mechanics in a way that made the N64's capabilities shine. This era showed that final bosses could be more than pattern memorization. They could be cinematic, emotional, and deeply tied to the narrative. By the time of the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube, final bosses had become sprawling, multi-phase battles designed to feel like true climaxes. Games were longer, stories were more ambitious, and players expected payoffs that matched the scope of the journey. Kingdom Hearts set the tone with its showdown against Ansem. The battle escalated through multiple forms. First a duel, then a transformation into monstrous entities, and finally a fight aboard a massive ship-like creature. Each phase introduced new mechanics, keeping players on their toes while driving home Ansem's role as a cosmic threat. In the action genre, Devil May Cry delivered bosses like Mundus that emphasized spectacle as much as difficulty. These fights demanded players not only survive, but do so with style, rewarding mastery of combo systems. RPGs continued to push boundaries. Final Fantasy X had Yu Yevon as its technical final boss, but the true climax was the battle against Jecht, also known as Braska's final Aeon. This fight wasn't just about mechanics, it was an emotional gut punch, forcing protagonist Tidus to confront his own father. And finally, if you know me, I always like to talk about this game when I get the chance, there's Shadow of the Colossus. Its final Colossus wasn't just another fight, it was an endurance test against a towering giant in a stormy ruin. Every step of the climb felt monumental, and by the end, the emotional weight of the game crashed down. The boss wasn't just an obstacle, it was the embodiment of the game's tragic themes. Now we've reached where we are today, where modern final bosses embrace spectacle, narrative, and emotional payoff in equal measure. Technology now allows for seamless blends of cutscenes and gameplay, and developers use this to craft bosses that are as much about storytelling as they are about mechanics. Dark Souls gave us Gwyn, Lord of Cinder. Unlike the towering monsters that came before him, Gwyn was surprisingly human-sized, armed with a flaming sword and relentless aggression. The haunting piano theme emphasized his tragic downfall, the once great lord reduced to a hollow shell. This subversion made Gwyn one of the most memorable final bosses of all time. God of War 2018 showcased another evolution, cinematic duels. The fight against Baldur spanned multiple phases and environments, blending gameplay with QuickTime events and cutscenes until the line between movie and game blurred. It's not just about beating a boss, it was about resolving a family saga. Then there are games like The Last of Us Part 2, which redefine the concept of a final boss. Instead of a giant monster or god, the climax is a brutal, intimate fight between Ellie and Abby. The mechanics are simple, but the emotional weight is devastating. It showed that a final boss doesn't need to be the hardest enemy, it just needs to matter. The evolution of final bosses mirrors the evolution of gaming itself. In the 8-bit days, bosses were little more than patterns to memorize. In the 16-bit era, they became bigger and flashier. The 3D Elite made them cinematic, while the 6th generation turned them into multi-phase marathons. Today, they can be anything: a screen-filling god, a rival duel, or even a quiet, tragic confrontation. But no matter how they're designed, final bosses remain one of gaming's most enduring traditions. They're the payoff for hours of effort, the moment that defines how we remember a game, and often, the encounters that become legend. Hey, thank you so much, as always, for coming and watching these videos. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. If you liked the video and you're new here, maybe think about going down, hitting that subscribe button, hit the like button, and ring that notification bell if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you as always, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you. Bye-bye.